Morning sun blazes through the glass cathedral of Vertex Dynamics. CEO Isabel Carter freezes mid-stride. A janitor's toolbox bears her company's original logo, the one from before her reign. "Why is our company's logo on your toolbox?" Her voice cuts through the marble lobby. The man looks up, calm as winter. "Because I designed it, 10 years before you knew it existed." Security rushes forward. Executives gasp. The janitor who built an empire is about to reclaim his truth. Stay with me until the end and comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning of March 15th, 2025, arrived at Vertex Dynamics headquarters the way it always did, with the ruthless precision of clockwork wrapped in California sunshine. The 70-story glass tower in downtown San Jose stood like a monument to the future, its reflective surface catching the dawn and throwing it back at the world in 1,000 fractured pieces. Inside, the empire hummed. Isabel Carter stepped from her private elevator at exactly 7:47 a.m., her Louboutins clicking a steady rhythm against Italian marble. At 32, she was the youngest CEO in Silicon Valley's top 10, a fact that tech magazines never tired of mentioning alongside her degrees from Wharton and MIT. Her father, Richard Carter, had built Vertex Dynamics into a cloud computing giant before his death 3 years ago. She had taken his creation and doubled its value. The lobby spread before her like a cathedral of commerce. 40-foot ceilings, walls of living moss, and a waterfall that cost more than most people's houses. 200 employees crossed the space each morning, most of them pulling six-figure salaries before they turned 30. Isabel knew the statistics by heart. Vertex employed 12,000 people worldwide. Last quarter's earnings, $847 million. Stock price, up 18% year over year. She owned this morning. She owned every morning. Ms. Carter. Her executive assistant, Marcus Webb, materialized at her elbow with a tablet and an expression of controlled urgency. "The board meeting's been moved up to 9. Patterson wants to discuss the Singapore acquisition before—" "Tell Patterson I'll discuss it when I'm ready, not when he's anxious." Isabel didn't break stride. "What's on my 7:30? "Coffee with the innovation team. They're pitching the new AI integration for—" Isabel stopped, not because of Marcus's words, but because something in her peripheral vision had snagged her attention like a thorn catching silk. Near the north side maintenance corridor where the lobby's glamour gave way to the building's working infrastructure, a man in a gray custodial uniform knelt beside a battered metal toolbox. The box itself was unremarkable, dented silver, covered in scratches, and the residue of a decade's labor. But there, beneath the grime and wear, stamped into the metal with the precision of a laser engraver, was a logo. Her logo. Not the current Vertex Dynamics brand, the sleek interlocking V and D that marketing had spent $400,000 refining 2 years ago. This was older, rougher. The original Skylink Systems logo from 2015, back when her father had acquired the company in what business journals had called a brilliant strategic pivot. Isabel's pulse quickened. She changed direction, her heels sharp as gunshots. "Miss Carter," Marcus called after her, confused. She ignored him. The maintenance worker was focused on his toolbox, pulling out a wrench with the careful economy of someone who'd performed the motion 10,000 times. He was tall, maybe 45, with dark hair graying at the temples and the kind of lean build that came from physical labor, not gym memberships. His hands were scarred. "Excuse me," Isabel's voice carried the full weight of her authority. "You there?" The man looked up slowly. His eyes were brown, tired, but steady, patient. "Yes, ma'am?" Around them, the lobby's morning rush began to slow. Heads turned. In a company where the CEO rarely descended from the executive floors, any public interaction was theater. Isabel pointed at the toolbox. "That logo. On your equipment. Where did you get it?" The man followed her gaze down to the toolbox, then back up to her face. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or resignation. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle, as if he were explaining something to a child. "I didn't get it from anywhere, ma'am. I put it there myself." "That's company property. That's a protected trademark." "Yes, ma'am. I know." The surrounding conversations had stopped entirely now. Junior executives lingered by the coffee bar. Administrative assistants paused mid-stride. Even the waterfall seemed to quiet. Isabel felt heat rising in her chest, the particular anger that came from being contradicted by someone so far beneath her on the corporate ladder they might as well be in the basement. You know that's intellectual property theft and you're admitting it? No, ma'am. The man straightened slowly, setting down his wrench. He was taller than she'd realized, nearly 6'2". I'm admitting that I created it, that logo. I designed it in 2015 for the company I co-founded, before your father purchased it, before it became Vertex Dynamics. The lobby seemed to inhale. Isabel stared at him. That's impossible. My father acquired Skylink Systems from its founders. I have the documentation. The founders received substantial compensation and sold their shares, yes. One of them did. The man's voice remained level, almost detached. That would be me, Daniel Reed, co-founder and chief technology officer of Skylink Systems. I sold my 48% stake to Richard Carter in June of 2015 for $200,000. Marcus had reached Isabel's side now, tablet clutched to his chest. Ms. Carter, perhaps we should... Quiet. Isabel's mind was racing, pulling up 10-year-old memories of board meetings and acquisition documents. Skylink Systems, her father's first major play after taking the reins from his own father. The purchase that had transformed a mid-tier software company into a cloud computing pioneer. She'd been 22, fresh from Wharton, too junior to be involved in the deal. But she remembered the celebration, the champagne, her father's triumphant smile. Daniel Reed. She tested the name. I don't recall that name from any company records. No, ma'am, you wouldn't. After the sale, your father had the board minutes amended. Legal restructuring, they called it. Cleaner narrative for investors. The official story became that he'd built Vertex's core technology from the ground up. Daniel's expression didn't change. Which, in a way, he did. He built it from the ground I'd laid. This is absurd. But even as Isabel said it, doubt crept in. Her father had been brilliant, but he'd also been ruthless. She'd learned that ruthlessness at his knee, absorbed it like gospel. If you co-founded a multi-million-dollar company, why are you working as a janitor? For the first time, something shifted in Daniel's eyes. Not anger, exactly, more like an old grief, worn smooth by time. Because 10 years ago, I had a choice to make, and I chose my daughter over everything else. The crowd around them had swelled. Isabel could see phones rising, capturing the moment. This would be on social media within minutes, on tech blogs within the hour. CEO confronts janitor. Janitor claims he founded the company. The narrative was already writing itself, and she was losing control of it. Security. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. I want this man escorted to HR for verification of his credentials and employment history. I want every document related to the Skylink acquisition pulled and on my desk in 20 minutes. And I want... That won't be necessary, Ms. Carter. The voice came from behind her, cultured, academic, touched with a British accent that never quite faded even after 20 years in California. Dr. Michael Hayes, Vertex's chief technology officer, was walking across the lobby with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd spent 4 decades in academia before joining the private sector. His white hair caught the morning light. Michael, I'm handling... No, you're not. Hayes reached them and stopped, looking at Daniel with an expression Isabel couldn't quite read. Respect, sadness. Because the man you're about to have escorted out by security isn't lying. I know him. Rather, I know of him. Hayes turned to face Isabel. Daniel Reed didn't just co-found Skylink Systems. He was the architect of the distributed cloud infrastructure that became Vertex's core platform. His PhD thesis at Stanford, which I sat on the committee for, by the way, laid the theoretical groundwork for everything this company does. The lobby had gone completely silent. Hayes continued, his voice carrying to every corner. I was a visiting professor in 2014 when Daniel was defending his dissertation. Adaptive resource allocation in distributed computing environments. It was brilliant, possibly the best work I'd seen in 30 years of academia. He could have had his pick of research positions. Instead, he and his wife, Hayes paused, choosing his words carefully. Instead, he built a company, and then he lost everything that mattered. Isabel felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, solid marble suddenly as unstable as water. Why wasn't I told about this? Because your father made certain no one would tell you. Hayes met her gaze steadily. Richard Carter was many things. A visionary, a builder, a man who could see 10 years ahead while everyone else was stuck in the present. But he was also someone who understood that history is written by whoever controls the pen. And after Daniel left, your father held every pen that mattered. Daniel had been watching this exchange in silence, his expression unreadable. Now he picked up his toolbox with a quiet finality. I appreciate you remembering, Dr. Hayes, but it doesn't change anything. I have work to do. Wait, Isabel's voice came out before she could think. You can't just... Where are you going? Daniel looked at her with those patient, tired eyes. Third floor HVAC system is making noise. Probably a loose bearing in the North Zone unit. I told facilities I'd have it fixed by noon. You expect me to just let you walk away? After dropping a bomb like this? Ma'am, with respect, you can do whatever you want. You own the building. He started walking toward the maintenance corridor. I just work here. The hell you do. Isabel's mind was spinning, but executive instinct was kicking in. Control the narrative, contain the damage, get ahead of the story. Marcus, clear my morning. I want conference room 7, and I want it locked down. Dr. Hayes, you're with me. And you... She pointed at Daniel. You're not fixing any HVAC units. You're coming upstairs, and you're going to tell me exactly what happened 10 years ago. Daniel stopped, turned. For a long moment, he just looked at her, and Isabel had the strange sensation of being evaluated by someone who saw past the title, the power, the armor she wore like a second skin. Why? He asked simply. Because if what you're saying is true, if even a fraction of it is true, then this company was built on a lie. And I need to know. Why? Daniel repeated. So you can protect Vertex's reputation? File some legal paperwork to cover the gaps? Maybe offer me a settlement to keep quiet? He shook his head slowly. I didn't tell you this story to cause problems. I just answered your question about a logo on a toolbox. Then why keep the toolbox? Isabel shot back. Why keep that logo visible? If you wanted to disappear, you could have scraped it off years ago. For the first time, something like a smile touched Daniel's face, sad and distant. Because some things you don't scrape off. Some things you carry with you, even when they're heavy. Especially when they're heavy. He shifted the toolbox to his other hand. That logo represents 3 years of my life. 90-hour weeks, sleeping under desks, believing in something bigger than myself. It represents a dream I built with the woman I loved before... He stopped, swallowed. Before everything changed. The lobby had become a gallery, 200 people frozen in witness. Isabel felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced since her father's funeral. This wasn't a hostile takeover or a board challenge, those she could handle with spreadsheets and strategy. This was something older, more human, more dangerous. 1 hour, she said. Give me 1 hour. Tell me what happened. And then, if you want to go fix the HVAC unit, I won't stop you. Daniel studied her face. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied something because he nodded slowly. 1 hour, but not in a conference room. Your office. Just you, me, and Dr. Hayes. No lawyers, no HR. Agreed. They rode the executive elevator in silence. Isabel, Daniel with his toolbox, Hayes, and Marcus Webb, who looked like he might faint from stress. The elevator climbed 70 floors in 45 seconds, Vivaldi playing softly from hidden speakers. Isabel's office occupied the entire top floor's northwest corner, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views across San Jose to the bay, furniture that cost more than luxury cars, art that museums had tried to buy. Behind her desk hung a portrait of her father, painted in the bold, aggressive style he'd favored. Richard Carter, founder and visionary, the placard read. Daniel stood in the doorway, taking it all in. His gaze lingered on the portrait. He looks the same, Daniel said quietly. Older in person than in that painting near the end, but the eyes, those stayed sharp. Isabel moved behind her desk, reclaiming her territory. Marcus started to follow, but she waved him off. Give us the room. Hold all calls. Miss Carter, I really think... Marcus, out. The assistant retreated, closing the door with a soft click. Isabel gestured to the chairs facing her desk. $8,000 each. Italian leather. Daniel set his toolbox down and sat. Hayes took the other chair. Start from the beginning, Isabel said, and don't leave anything out. Daniel looked out the window at the sprawling city below, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent a decade holding a story inside. 2012, he began. That's when it started. Not the company, the dream. I was 28, finishing my PhD at Stanford, studying distributed computing architecture. The field was exploding. Cloud technology was moving from theory to reality, but there was a problem. Small and medium businesses couldn't access it efficiently. The infrastructure was built for giants. Amazon, Microsoft, Google. Everyone else got priced out or had to cobble together solutions that barely worked. He leaned back, eyes distant with memory. I met Laura Chen in an algorithms seminar. She was getting her MBA, had a background in systems engineering from Caltech. Brilliant mind. Could see the business implications of technical decisions 3 moves ahead. We started talking about the access problem. She asked me one question that changed everything. What if you could make enterprise-level cloud computing work like a public library? Walk in, check out what you need, return it when you're done, pay only for the time you used. Hayes nodded. The adaptive allocation model, your dissertation. Her insight, my implementation, Daniel corrected. We spent 2 years developing the theoretical framework. Laura worked it from the business side, market analysis, pricing models, customer profiles. I built the technical architecture. By 2014, we had something revolutionary, a platform that could dynamically allocate computing resources across hundreds of small clients, shifting capacity in real time based on need. Efficient, affordable, elegant. Daniel's voice softened. We got married in June 2014. Small ceremony in Palo Alto, 20 friends, pizza reception. We were broke, living off student loans and hope. But we were happy. We'd submitted the dissertation, defended it successfully. Dr. Hayes, you called it potentially transformative. You suggested we consider commercialization. I remember, Hayes said quietly. I also remember telling you to be careful, that the valley could be cutthroat. You did. We didn't listen. Daniel's smile was rueful. We were 29 years old, armed with a PhD and a dream. We thought that was enough. He stood, moving to the window, hands clasped behind his back. We incorporated Skylink systems in September 2014, rented a garage in Sunnyvale, every startup cliché you can imagine. Folding tables, whiteboards covering the walls, sleeping bags in the corner. Laura handled business development while I coded, 18-hour days, ramen noodles. We burned through our savings in 3 months. But you got traction, Isabel said, leaning forward despite herself. We got traction, Daniel confirmed. By January 2015, we had 12 clients, small businesses mostly. A boutique law firm, an architecture studio, a regional restaurant chain that needed inventory management. Nothing huge, but they were paying customers. Revenue was $8,000 a month, barely covering server costs, but it was growing. 20% month over month. He turned back to face them. That's when Laura got pregnant. The office seemed to hold its breath. Grace, Daniel said, his voice cracking slightly on the name before he steadied it. We found out in February. Laura was terrified and ecstatic in equal measure. We weren't ready. Not financially, not practically. The company was consuming everything, but we were going to make it work. We were going to build something for our daughter, a legacy. By March, we'd attracted investor attention. Small angels, mostly. People who'd made money in the first dot-com boom and were looking for the next wave. We pitched 12 times in 4 weeks, got term sheets from 3 groups. We chose Clearwater Ventures, $500,000 for 20% equity. It felt like winning the lottery. Daniel's hands tightened on the window frame. We started hiring, brought on 4 engineers, 2 salespeople, a proper office manager. Moved into real offices in Mountain View. Nothing fancy, but we had conference rooms and a kitchen. Laura was showing by then, 4 months along. She'd take investor calls with one hand on her belly, sketching growth projections with the other. By May, revenue hit $45,000 a month. We had 37 clients. The platform was humming. Laura joked that we'd gone from ramen to real groceries, not steak, but chicken was on the table. We started talking about Series A funding, maybe $3 million, enough to really scale. The room was completely still. Even the city sounds from 70 floors below seemed muted. June 3rd, 2015, Daniel said. Wednesday. Laura had a meeting in Palo Alto with a potential client, an architecture firm interested in our rendering allocation service. I was in the office dealing with a server migration. The plan was she'd be back by 3, we'd review the sales pipeline, then maybe catch an early dinner. His voice went flat. She never made it home. Isabel felt her chest tighten. El Camino Real, just south of Stanford campus. Intersection with Page Mill Road. A semi-truck ran a red light. The police said she died instantly. They told me that part multiple times, like it was supposed to be comforting. She didn't suffer, as if the speed of death made it hurt less. Daniel's reflection in the window was ghostly, translucent. Grace survived. The doctors called it a miracle. Laura's body protected her, and she was far enough along. Emergency C-section, 2 pounds, 9 ounces. NICU for 6 weeks. I'd go from the hospital to the office to the hospital. 48 hours straight awake, trying to keep the company running while my daughter fought to breathe through tubes. Hayes had removed his glasses, cleaning them with shaking hands. The investors were sympathetic but practical. Daniel continued. They needed leadership. Laura had been our business anchor, sales, operations, investor relations. With her gone, I was supposed to do her job and mine, CTO and CEO, fundraising and coding, all while spending every free minute in the NICU, watching Grace's tiny chest rise and fall, praying she'd make it through another night. I tried. God, I tried. But by July, I was fracturing. The company needed capital. We were burning $80,000 a month with the new team. I was pitching Series A investors while running on 3 hours of sleep, showing up to meetings with spit up on my collar. One VC actually asked if I'd considered exploring strategic alternatives given my personal circumstances. He meant selling, giving up. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's when Richard Carter appeared. Isabel's breath caught. There it was, the connection she'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Your father was already legendary by then. Built Carter Technologies from a software consultancy into a major player. He had the Midas touch. Everything he acquired turned to gold. He'd been tracking Skylink for months, apparently. Saw our growth, understood the potential of the technology. He visited me in August, came to the office, sat in our conference room and made his pitch. He wanted to acquire Skylink, not just invest, but own it. He'd keep the team, accelerate growth, provide the capital and expertise we needed. I could stay on as CTO or move into a research role. Whatever I wanted. You built something remarkable, he told me. But you're drowning. Let me throw you a line. Daniel turned from the window, his face etched with decade-old pain. The offer was $200,000 for my 48%. The remaining 52% split between Laura's estate, Clearwater Ventures, and the employee pool. He was acquiring for another $300,000. $500,000 total for a company that, by every metric, was worth at least 3 times that. But he knew I was desperate. Grace was still in the hospital. Medical bills were mounting. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours straight in months. I negotiated. Of course I did. Tried to push for more equity, better terms, some kind of earnout based on future performance. Your father was sympathetic but firm. This is the offer, Daniel, and it expires Friday. It was Wednesday. Grace was scheduled to come home from the NICU on Saturday if I could prove I had stable housing and income. Isabel felt sick. I signed, Daniel said simply. Sold my shares for $200,000. Your father's lawyers had documents ready, purchase agreement, non-compete, NDA. The NDA was particularly thorough. I wasn't prohibited from saying I'd founded Skylink, but there were confidentiality provisions around the company's proprietary technology and business strategies. Essentially, if I talked publicly about what I'd built, I'd be in breach. Legal bills I couldn't afford. The $200,000 cleared on Friday. Saturday, I brought Grace home. 2 days later, Richard Carter announced the acquisition of Skylink Systems at a press conference. He positioned it as Carter Technologies expanding into cloud infrastructure, mentioned the innovative team he was acquiring, but not by name. By October, the rebranding was complete. Vertex Dynamics was born. Daniel's laugh was bitter. He kept his word, technically. I stayed on as a consultant for 6 months, watched your father's team optimize the code I'd written, scale the infrastructure Laura and I had designed. They were good, I'll give them that. They took our foundation and built a skyscraper. Revenue went from $50,000 a month to $500,000. Then $2 million. By the end of 2016, Vertex was valued at $50 million. And where were you? Isabel asked, though she dreaded the answer. At home, alone with a baby girl who'd never know her mother. My non-compete restricted me from working in cloud computing for 3 years. The $200,000 was gone, half to medical bills, the rest to rent and childcare. I applied for research positions, but the gap in my resume was damning. 6 months of spotty consulting work, then nothing. I'd send out applications, and HR departments would Google me, find nothing. Daniel Reed, the invisible man. He sat back down, suddenly looking exhausted. By 2017, I was broke. Grace was 2, beautiful, brilliant, asking questions about everything. She needed stability, routine, a father who was present, not chasing a career that kept rejecting him. So I made a choice. I took a job with a commercial cleaning company, night shifts at first, then day maintenance. It paid $18 an hour, enough to keep a 1-bedroom apartment in Fremont and put food on the table. The hours were perfect. I could drop Grace at daycare, work my shift, pick her up by 3:30, be home for dinner, bedtime stories, homework. I became a full-time dad who happened to have a job, instead of a career professional who happened to have a kid. Hayes spoke for the first time in 10 minutes. Daniel, why didn't you reach out? I could have helped. Recommendations, connections. I did reach out, Daniel said quietly. December 2016. Sent you an email. Asked if you knew of any research positions, maybe adjunct teaching. You never responded. Hayes went pale. I never received your university email. It went to spam, probably. Or maybe you just missed it in the flood. It doesn't matter. Daniel's voice held no accusation, just fact. I tried others too. Old Stanford colleagues, people from conferences. Either they didn't respond or they'd been contacted by Vertex's legal team, friendly warnings about the NDA, concerns about trade secrets. The message was clear. Daniel Reed was radioactive. So I stopped trying. Focused on Grace, she learned to read, started kindergarten, lost her first tooth. Every evening I'd help with homework at our tiny kitchen table. On weekends we'd go to the park. She loved the swings. I'd push her higher and higher until she screamed with joy. Those moments, Miss Carter, those were worth more than any stock options. Isabel found her voice. But you kept the toolbox, kept that logo visible. Because I needed to remember, Daniel said simply. Not for bitterness or revenge, but because that logo represented 3 years of my life with Laura. Every time I see it, I remember her sketching business models on napkins. Her laugh when we closed our first deal, the way she'd rest her hand on her belly and dream out loud about the world we'd build for our daughter. He picked up the toolbox, running his fingers across the worn logo. This isn't about money or recognition. It's about memory. Laura and I built something beautiful, even if it only lasted a little while, even if someone else took credit, even if the world forgot. He looked directly at Isabel. Your father didn't steal the company exactly. I sold it to him. But he did erase the story, made it seem like he'd conjured Vertex from nothing, when really he'd built it on a foundation 2 desperate kids laid in a garage. The office was silent except for the whisper of climate control. Isabel stood, moving to the window, 70 floors below, San Jose sprawled toward the bay. Millions of people, thousands of companies, countless stories intersecting and diverging like streams finding the sea. How many other Daniel Reeds were out there? How many erased foundations? My father, she said slowly, always told me that business was about vision, not sentiment, that the strong survive by making hard choices others won't make. He said that's what separated billionaires from everyone else, the willingness to do what was necessary. She turned to face Daniel. What he didn't tell me was the cost. Or maybe he did and I wasn't listening, too busy learning how to be strong, how to win. Her voice cracked slightly. How to be him. Daniel stood picking up his toolbox. Ms. Carter, I didn't tell you this story to make you feel guilty about your father's choices. He's dead. He can't answer for them, and you shouldn't have to. I told you because you asked. And because that young woman in the lobby, demanding to know about a logo, she deserved the truth. But your hour's up. I've got an HVAC unit waiting, and Grace gets home from school at 3:45. I like to have dinner started when she walks in. He moved toward the door. Wait. Isabel's voice was sharp. You can't just... This isn't finished. There has to be something. Compensation, recognition, a position on the board. I don't want your money or your guilt. Daniel's hand rested on the door handle. I made my choice 10 years ago, chose Grace over everything else, and I'd make the same choice 1,000 times. She's 15 now, smart, kind, curious about the world. She wants to study engineering at Stanford, maybe follow in her parents' footsteps. Everything I've done since Laura died has been for her. Then do it for her, Isabel said desperately, scrambling for leverage. Let me make this right. For Grace. For Laura's memory. For Ms. Carter. Daniel's voice was gentle but final. You can't make this right. What happened, happened. The past is written. All you can do is decide what you write next. He opened the door. Thank you for listening. That's more than most people would have done. And then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Isabel stood frozen, her mind reeling. Hayes rose slowly from his chair. That man, Hayes said quietly, could have been one of the defining technologists of our generation. Instead, he's fixing air conditioners. He moved toward the door, then paused. Your father was brilliant, Isabel, but brilliance without conscience is just cleverness, and cleverness without empathy is just cruelty. He left. Isabel was alone in her empire, 70 floors of glass and steel and success built on a foundation she'd never questioned. She looked at her father's portrait, seeing it with new eyes. The sharp gaze that had always seemed so confident now looked calculating, hard. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, with 12 urgent messages. The board wanted statements. PR needed guidance. Social media was exploding with speculation. A video of the lobby confrontation had already hit 200,000 views. But Isabel ignored them all. Instead, she sat at her desk and opened her laptop, typed a name into the search bar. Laura Chen Reed. The results populated slowly. Archived news articles, an obituary from June 2015, a few academic papers. There was a photo from Stanford's engineering newsletter. Laura at her MBA graduation, cap and gown, hand resting on her pregnant belly, smile radiant with hope. Isabel stared at that smile and felt something crack inside her chest. Outside, the sun climbed higher over San Jose. On the third floor, Daniel Reed removed the access panel from an HVAC unit and began diagnosing a loose bearing. At 3:45, he'd leave, right on schedule, like he did every day. Tonight, he'd make spaghetti. Grace loved his spaghetti. And in her tower office, Isabel Carter stared at the portrait of her father and wondered, for the first time in her life, if winning was the same as being right. The story was just beginning. The video hit TechCrunch at 11:47 a.m. By noon, it had spread to Bloomberg, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal. By 1 o'clock, Daniel Reed's name was trending on Twitter alongside #Vertex Dynamics and #Forgotten Founder. The narrative was already solidifying. Tech CEO humiliates janitor who built her empire. David versus Goliath. Silicon Valley's conscience on trial. Isabel watched the metrics climb from her office, each refresh bringing fresh waves of commentary. Some defended her. She hadn't known. How could she be blamed for her father's actions? But most of the internet had already decided the 32-year-old billionaire CEO versus the single father in custodial gray. The optics were devastating. Marcus knocked softly before entering. Ms. Carter, the board is demanding a statement. Patterson's threatening to call an emergency meeting. PR has drafted 3 different responses, and legal wants, tell them to wait. Isabel's voice was distant. She was still staring at Laura Chen Reed's photograph, that radiant smile frozen in time. I need to think. With respect, we don't have time to think. This is a crisis. Every minute we stay silent looks like we're hiding something. Marcus set his tablet down, showing her the cascade of headlines. Tech giant built on stolen dreams. Janitor reveals he founded billion-dollar company. Vertex Dynamics dark secret exposed. It's getting worse by the hour. Isabel finally tore her eyes from the screen. What did Daniel do after he left my office? Marcus blinked at the question. I'm sorry? Daniel Reed, after he left here. Where did he go? I assume back to work? Maintenance called about the 3rd floor HVAC. Find him. Isabel stood abruptly. I don't care if you have to check every floor personally. Find him and bring him back up here. Miss Carter, I really think we need to focus on damage control. That's exactly what I'm doing. Isabel grabbed her phone. And Marcus, do it quietly. No security escort this time. Just ask him. If he says no, accept it, but ask. Marcus left, confusion clear on his face. Alone again, Isabel pulled up the personnel database. It took 3 different search queries before she found him. Reed, Daniel J. Facilities Maintenance, day shift, hire date, March 2018, 7 years. He'd been working in this building for 7 years, and she'd never known. She scrolled through his file. No disciplinary issues. Perfect attendance except for 2 days each year, June 3rd and August 15th. She didn't need to guess what those dates meant. The day Laura died. The day he'd sold his dreams for $200,000 and the chance to bring his daughter home. Her phone rang. Patterson, the board member, she let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Her head of PR. Voicemail. The executive team chat was exploding with messages. She silenced it. Instead, she opened a private browser and began searching. Laura Chen Reed's obituary provided family details, survived by husband Daniel and daughter Grace. Memorial service held at Stanford Memorial Church. In lieu of flowers, donations to the March of Dimes NICU Fund. Even in death, Laura had been thinking of others. Isabel found Laura's LinkedIn profile, frozen in time. Stanford MBA, 2014. Before that, systems engineer at an aerospace startup. Volunteer work with Girls Who Code. Recommendations from professors and colleagues, all glowing. Brilliant strategic mind, natural leader. Could see 3 moves ahead. The kind of person who should have built empires, not died on El Camino Real at 29. Next, she searched for Daniel's academic work. It took longer. His digital footprint had been deliberately minimized, or perhaps just buried under a decade of neglect. But eventually, she found it. His PhD dissertation, archived in Stanford's digital library. Adaptive resource allocation in distributed computing environments. Defended June 2014. Committee Chair, Professor Michael Hayes. She downloaded the PDF, 247 pages of dense technical work. The abstract alone made clear this wasn't incremental research. Daniel had fundamentally reimagined how cloud resources could be distributed, creating a theoretical framework that Isabel suddenly realized with cold certainty was the skeleton upon which Vertex's entire platform had been built. Her father's voice echoed in memory. We developed a revolutionary approach to cloud allocation. Dynamic, adaptive, efficient. Always we. Never mentioning that the revolution had been designed by a 28-year-old PhD student in love with an MBA candidate who could see the future. The intercom buzzed. Ms. Carter, Mr. Webb is here with the person you requested. Send them in. The door opened. Marcus entered first, looking uncomfortable. Behind him came Daniel, still carrying that battered toolbox, a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead from whatever work he'd been doing. He stopped just inside the threshold, wary. Mr. Reed, Isabel kept her voice neutral. Thank you for coming back. Your assistant said it was important. Daniel's tone was polite but guarded. Though I should mention the HVAC unit isn't finished. Another hour, maybe. Someone else can finish it. Isabel nodded to Marcus. That'll be all. Ms. Carter, I don't think Marcus, please. The assistant retreated, closing the door with obvious reluctance. Isabel and Daniel faced each other across the expensive office, 70 floors of separation from the garage where he'd once built dreams. I've been reading about your work, Isabel said. Your dissertation. It's brilliant. Daniel's expression didn't change. That was a long time ago. 10 years isn't that long, and brilliance doesn't expire. She gestured to the chair. Please sit. I promise this won't take long. He sat slowly, toolbox at his feet, hands resting on his knees. Waiting. Isabel took a breath. I need to know something, and I need you to be honest. When my father approached you in 2015, did he know you were vulnerable? Did he deliberately wait until you were desperate? Daniel considered the question carefully. Your father was a businessman, a brilliant one. He saw an opportunity, a valuable company whose co-founder was drowning. Could he have offered more money? Yes. Could he have structured a deal that let me keep some equity? Probably, but why would he? From his perspective, I was a motivated seller. That's not unethical, that's just business. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. Daniel's voice was steady. You want me to say he was a villain, that he exploited my grief, stole my company, destroyed my life? It would make this easier for you. Clear villains and victims, simple moral lines. But the truth is more complicated. Your father made an offer. I accepted it. I had choices. You had impossible choices, Isabel countered. A sick infant and mounting debt. That's not the same as having real options. Maybe not, but I still made the choice, and honestly, Daniel's gaze was direct. I don't regret it. Would I like to have more money? Sure. Would it be nice to have people remember that I co-founded this company? I suppose, but Grace is 15 now. She's brilliant, kind, curious. She wants to change the world, and I got to be there for every moment. Every first day of school, every science fair, every time she needed her father. His voice softened. Laura would have wanted that. She would have told me to take the money and run, to focus on our daughter, so that's what I did. Isabel found herself blinking back unexpected tears. You're a better person than I am. I'm a person who made different choices than you've made. That doesn't make me better. Daniel shifted in his chair. Ms. Carter, why am I here? What do you want from me? I don't know yet, Isabel admitted. This morning, everything made sense. I ran a successful company. I was good at my job. I thought I understood how we got here. And then you showed me I'd been standing on a foundation I never knew existed. So now you know. Does it change anything? It should. Isabel stood, moving to the window. Below, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. But I don't know how. I can't undo what my father did. I can't give you back 10 years. I can't bring Laura back. She turned to face him. But I can acknowledge the truth, publicly. I can tell people that Vertex Dynamics was built on technology you developed, that my father acquired it, not invented it. Daniel's jaw tightened. And what happens then? The stock takes a hit because investors realize your origin story is different? Your board gets nervous? Maybe some lawsuits from shareholders who claim they were misled. He shook his head. You'd be destroying value to salve your conscience. Maybe that value deserves to be destroyed if it's built on a lie. It's not a lie, though. Not really. Daniel leaned forward. Your father acquired Skylink legally. He built Vertex into what it is today. That wasn't fake. The technology I developed was the seed, but he grew the tree. You water it now. All those employees, all those clients, all the value this company creates, that's real. It doesn't vanish just because the origin story is more complicated than people thought. Then what do you want? Isabel heard the frustration in her own voice. You must want something. Justice? Compensation? Your name in the history books? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, as if he was discovering his own answer as he said it. I want my daughter to be proud of me. Isabel blinked. What? Grace. Daniel's hands tightened on his knees. She's 15, smart as hell, curious about everything. She wants to study engineering at Stanford, same program her mother and I went through. And sometimes, late at night, she asks me about my PhD, about why I'm not using it, about why I fix air conditioners instead of building things. What do you tell her? The truth, that I made choices that meant more than a career, that being her father was more important than being Dr. Reed. His voice caught slightly. But lately, I can see it in her eyes. This question, this wondering if maybe her father gave up too much, if maybe she's the reason I'm not the person I could have been. I know it's not true, Daniel interrupted. Rationally, I know that. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. The only good thing that came from the worst day of my life. But she's a teenager trying to figure out the world, and she looks at her friends' parents, successful engineers, lawyers, professors, and then she looks at me in my custodial uniform, and I can see her doing the math. He stood, picking up his toolbox. So if you want to do something, Ms. Carter, don't do it for me. Don't do it for some abstract sense of justice or corporate morality. Do it so that one day when Grace Reed applies to Stanford's engineering program, she can write in her essay that her father helped build one of Silicon Valley's most successful companies. So she can be proud of where she comes from, not ashamed. The words hung in the air between them. I can do that, Isabel said quietly. I can make sure people know the truth. But Daniel, if I do this, if I tell the real story, it's going to create waves. Media attention, scrutiny. Your privacy is going to disappear. I know. People will want to interview you, write articles. The internet will dissect every aspect of your life. They'll find your address, your daughter's school. It won't be quiet. I know, Daniel repeated. But maybe it's time. Maybe Grace needs to see that her father didn't just disappear. That the work her mother and I did mattered. That we built something real, even if we didn't get to keep it. Isabel nodded slowly. Give me 24 hours. I need to talk to the board, work with legal and PR. I need to do this right. What exactly are you planning to do? I'm not sure yet, but minimum, a public statement acknowledging your role in founding Skylink and developing the core technology. Your name in Vertex's official history. Maybe more. I'll figure it out. She met his gaze. Is there anything you need? Anything I should know before I pull this trigger? Daniel thought for a moment. Grace gets out of school at 3:30. I pick her up every day. That's non-negotiable. Whatever happens, whatever media circus this becomes, I'm there at 3:30. Understood. And Miss Carter, when you tell this story, when you talk about Laura, please be kind. She was brilliant and funny and fierce. She deserves to be remembered as more than just a tragic death in an acquisition story. I will. Isabel's voice was thick. I promise. Daniel moved to the door, then paused. You know what Laura used to say? The best code is invisible. It works perfectly, and nobody notices because they're too busy using the product. I think she'd appreciate the irony. Her work is inside every Vertex transaction, completely invisible, while everyone sees the shiny tower. He smiled sadly. She'd probably find that funny. After he left, Isabel sat in silence for several minutes. Then she buzzed Marcus. Get me Patterson, legal, PR, and Dr. Hayes, conference room in 30 minutes. And Marcus? Cancel everything else today. Everything. The next 6 hours were brutal. Patterson and 3 other board members appeared via video conference, their faces projected on the room's massive screen like a tribunal. Isabel presented the situation with clinical precision. Daniel's claims, Hayes's confirmation, the historical record, and the current media firestorm. This is a disaster, Patterson said flatly. The 60-year-old venture capitalist had backed Richard Carter's early plays and still held 8% of Vertex. We're talking about potential fraud claims, shareholder lawsuits, SEC inquiries. We're talking about the truth, Isabel interrupted. The truth is a luxury when you're managing a public company. Patterson's face was hard. Your father built Vertex. Whatever academic work preceded it is irrelevant. The value is in the execution, the scaling, the market positioning. That was Richard's genius. Built on Daniel Reed's foundation. A foundation he willingly sold, for fair market value at the time, I might add. We did our due diligence. The acquisition was clean. Patterson leaned forward. Isabel, I understand you're feeling guilty. Your father's business practices were aggressive, but they were legal. And this kind of public confession will damage shareholder value. It's irresponsible. What's irresponsible is continuing a lie. It's not a lie, the CFO interjected. Sarah Chen had been with Vertex for 6 years, recruited from Goldman Sachs. It's a standard acquisition and rebranding. Daniel Reed sold his company. That's the end of the story. Except it's not, Dr. Hayes said quietly. The CTO had been silent until now, but his voice carried weight. Because we've spent 10 years claiming Richard Carter invented our core platform. Every investor presentation, every media interview. We've explicitly said Richard Carter pioneered adaptive cloud allocation. That's not branding, that's false attribution. That's Richard Carter being the public face of his company, Patterson shot back. It's erasure, Hayes corrected, and it's wrong. The argument spiraled for another hour. Legal outlined the risks, potential lawsuits, though probably not successful given the clean acquisition. PR sketched 3 strategies: deny everything, acknowledge but minimize, or full transparency. The board was split, with Patterson's faction pushing for minimal acknowledgement and damage control. Finally, Isabel cut through the noise. Here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow morning, I'm releasing a statement. It will acknowledge that Vertex Dynamics' core technology was developed by Dr. Daniel Reed and his late wife, Laura Chen Reed, co-founders of Skylink Systems, which we acquired in 2015. It will state that my father, in his enthusiasm for the company's success, sometimes overstated his personal role in technical innovation. It will express regret for this mischaracterization and commit to ensuring that the Reeds receive appropriate recognition going forward. Isabel, you can't, Patterson began. I'm CEO, Isabel said flatly. This is my decision. You can vote to remove me if you want, but you'll need 6 board members, and I know you don't have them. So unless you're calling for an emergency vote right now, this conversation is over. Silence. Patterson's face was red, but he said nothing. The other board members looked uncomfortable, but didn't object. Good. Sarah, work with PR on the exact language. Hayes, I want a technical brief explaining Daniel's contributions in terms investors will understand. Legal? Draft whatever indemnifications or releases we need. Isabel stood. We release at 9 a.m. tomorrow. That gives us 14 hours. Let's make them count. The meeting broke. As people filed out, Hayes lingered. That took courage, he said quietly. Or stupidity. Patterson might be right. This could tank the stock. Maybe, but it's the right thing. Hayes smiled sadly. Your father was brilliant, Isabel. But he had a blind spot. He believed that success justified the means, that winning was its own morality. You're better than that. Am I? I didn't question any of this until today. I happily ran a company built on an erased foundation. Because you didn't know. Now you do. What matters is what you do next. Hayes moved to the door. Daniel Reed spent 10 years choosing his daughter over his ego. That's real strength. The question is whether we have the strength to do the right thing even when it costs us. Alone again, Isabel worked through the night. The statement went through 17 drafts, each word scrutinized. Too apologetic, and it looked like admission of wrongdoing. Too clinical, and it sounded heartless. She needed something that acknowledged truth without destroying confidence. At 2 a.m., she finally had something she could live with. She emailed it to the team, then sat back in her chair, exhausted. Through the window, San Jose was a constellation of light spreading toward darkness. Somewhere down there, Daniel Reed was probably asleep in a modest apartment, alarm set for 6 a.m. so he could make Grace breakfast before school. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Daniel. Your assistant gave me your contact. I wanted to say thank you. Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you for listening. That's more than most people would do. Isabel stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a response. Thank you for telling the truth, and for reminding me that some things matter more than success. She didn't expect a reply, but one came a minute later. Grace is excited about tomorrow. She doesn't fully understand what's happening, but she knows something important is coming. You've given her something she hasn't had before. Permission to be proud. That's worth more than you know. Isabel set down her phone and allowed herself, finally, to cry. For Laura Chen Reed, who never got to see her daughter grow up. For Daniel, who'd traded everything for love. For her father, whose brilliance had been shadowed by his ruthlessness. And for herself, the woman who'd inherited an empire without knowing its real cost. At 9 a.m. the next morning, Vertex Dynamics released its statement. Within minutes, it was picked up by every major news outlet. The stock opened down 7%, then recovered slightly as analysts digested the news. Some praised Isabel's transparency, others called it reckless. Twitter exploded with hot takes. But in a high school parking lot in Fremont, Grace Reed was showing her phone to her friends, her face glowing with pride. "That's my dad," she kept saying. "That's my dad they're talking about." And in his maintenance office on the third floor of Vertex Dynamics, Daniel Reed sat very still, reading the statement over and over, allowing himself, just for a moment, to remember who he used to be. The man who'd built something beautiful with the woman he loved before tragedy rewrote everything. The truth was finally out, fragile and incomplete as it was. What came next, neither Daniel nor Isabel could predict. But at least now, the foundation was visible. The ghosts had names. And somewhere, impossibly distant and close, Laura Chen Reed was smiling. The statement went live at precisely 9 a.m. Pacific Time, released simultaneously across Vertex Dynamics' website, social media channels, and a direct wire to major news outlets. Isabel watched from her office as the digital world erupted in real time. The company's stock ticker on her secondary monitor flickered red, dropping 8% in the first 12 minutes of trading before stabilizing at negative 6.3. Her phone exploded with calls. Patterson, the head of investor relations, 3 different journalists. She ignored them all, her eyes fixed on the screen showing social media reactions cascading like a waterfall. Some praised her transparency. Others called her naive. A few suggested this was a publicity stunt. But underneath the noise, a different narrative was emerging. One about hidden histories and forgotten founders, about the price of ambition and the cost of silence. Marcus appeared at her door, pale and clutching his tablet like a life preserver. "Miss Carter, we have 17 interview requests. Bloomberg wants you on camera in an hour. The Wall Street Journal is asking for a full feature, and Patterson has called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. Cancel Bloomberg. Tell the Journal maybe, but not today. And tell Patterson the board can meet when I'm ready, not when he's panicking." Isabel finally looked up from her screen. "Where's Daniel?" "Mr. Reed? I assume he's working his normal Find him, please." Marcus hesitated, clearly wanting to argue about priorities, then nodded and left. Isabel turned back to her computer, pulling up the full cascade of responses. Someone had already created a hashtag. #Forgotten Founders. Stories were proliferating from across the tech industry. Engineers whose code had been attributed to executives, designers whose visions had been claimed by bosses, researchers whose breakthroughs had made other people famous. Daniel Reed had become, overnight, the symbol of something larger than himself. Her desk phone rang. The internal line. She picked it up. "Yes?" "Isabel, it's Michael." Hayes' voice was steady but urgent. "You need to come down to the main floor, now." "What's happening?" "Just come. You need to see this." Isabel took the elevator down, her reflection ghostly in the polished steel doors. She'd been awake for 32 hours straight, running on coffee and adrenaline and something that felt dangerously close to righteousness. When the doors opened on the main lobby, she stepped out into a scene she hadn't anticipated. The vast space was filled with Vertex employees, hundreds of them, maybe more, gathered in loose clusters throughout the atrium. They'd abandoned their desks, their meetings, their normal Thursday morning routines, and they were all looking at something near the maintenance corridor. Isabel pushed through the crowd, murmuring apologies, until she reached the center. There, sitting on the marble floor with his back against the wall and his toolbox beside him, was Daniel Reed. He wasn't alone. Arranged in a semicircle around him sat maybe 40 people, engineers, designers, operations staff, people from every level of the company. They were listening intently as Daniel spoke, his voice quiet but carrying in the sudden hush. "Wasn't about the algorithm itself," Daniel was saying to a young woman who looked fresh out of college. "The elegance was in recognizing that cloud resources are like water in a river system. You don't need to control every drop, You just need to understand the flow, the pressure points, where things will naturally accumulate and where they'll run dry. Laura explained it to me using a metaphor about libraries. He stopped when he saw Isabel, and the entire crowd turned as one. The silence was immediate and absolute. Miss Carter. Daniel started to stand, but Isabel held up a hand. Please don't. I'm not here to interrupt. She looked around at the assembled faces, young and old, excited and curious, all of them caught in this impromptu moment of revelation. What's going on here? A man in his 30s with a Vertex Dynamics engineering badge spoke up. We wanted to hear the real story, about Skylink, about the technology, about, he gestured at Daniel, about what actually happened. We read the statement, added a woman with purple streaked hair, but it was so corporate, so sanitized. We wanted the truth from the person who lived it. Daniel looked uncomfortable. They just started showing up about 20 minutes ago. I tried to go back to work, but we wouldn't let him, the young woman near Daniel said defiantly. She had an intern badge. My professor at Stanford mentioned Dr. Reed's dissertation once, said it was foundational work that somehow got overlooked. When I started working here 6 months ago, I looked for his name everywhere. In the company history, the technical documentation, the founder biographies. Nothing. Like he'd been erased. And then this morning, her voice caught. This morning, I found out he's been here the whole time, fixing our air conditioning. The crowd murmured agreement. Isabel felt something shifting, tectonic plates grinding beneath the surface of her carefully controlled company. I don't want to cause problems, Daniel said, directing his words to Isabel. I can go. I should go. I have work. No. The word came out sharper than Isabel intended. She softened her tone. No, you shouldn't go. This is... She looked around at the sea of faces, all these brilliant people who'd chosen to spend their morning sitting on marble floors, listening to a man in a custodial uniform tell them the truth. This is what should have happened 10 years ago. She sat down on the floor. The gesture sent a ripple through the crowd. Gasps, whispers, phones rising to capture the moment. Isabel Carter, youngest CEO in Silicon Valley's top 10, billionaire by 32, sitting cross-legged on her own lobby floor in a $3,000 suit. She didn't care. Tell us, she said to Daniel, tell us everything, how you and Laura built it, what you were trying to solve, why it mattered. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for something. Sincerity, maybe, or just permission. Whatever he found seemed sufficient because he nodded slowly. Okay, but I need to start before Skylink. I need to start with why Laura and I believed this work mattered in the first place. The crowd settled in, people sitting, leaning against walls, some pulling out notebooks. Isabel noticed Dr. Hayes standing at the edge, a small smile on his face. 2012, Daniel began, and his voice took on the cadence of someone remembering not just facts but feelings. I was in my second year of PhD work at Stanford. The field was exploding, cloud computing was transitioning from theory to reality. But there was this massive equity problem that nobody wanted to talk about. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The big players, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they were building incredible infrastructure, but it was designed for other giants. If you were a Fortune 500 company with millions to spend and a team of engineers to manage it, you could access enterprise-level computing. But if you were a small business, a nonprofit, a startup with 5 people and a dream, you were locked out. The economics didn't work. The technical complexity was overwhelming. You got stuck with inferior solutions, or you just went without. Laura understood this before I did, Daniel continued, his voice softening when he said her name. She'd worked at an aerospace startup before business school. Small team, incredible engineers, but they needed massive computing power for simulation work. Computational fluid dynamics, structural analysis, the kind of number crunching that requires serious hardware. But they couldn't afford dedicated infrastructure, and the available cloud options were too expensive or too inflexible. A young engineer raised his hand tentatively. So you built a way to democratize access? Not exactly. We built a way to make access efficient enough that democratization became economically viable. Daniel pulled a marker from his toolbox and stood, moving to a nearby wall. Can I... Draw on it, Isabel said immediately. Whatever you need. Daniel sketched quickly on the pristine white wall. Simple diagrams, resource flowcharts, elegant mathematical notations. The crowd leaned in. Think about how a traditional cloud system worked in 2014, Daniel said as he drew. You'd rent server space, basically buying a chunk of computing power whether you needed it all or not, like renting an entire warehouse to store one car. Wasteful, but that's how the economics worked. The cloud providers needed guaranteed revenue. The customers had no flexibility. He added more lines, nodes connecting in complex patterns. Laura asked me one question that changed everything. What if computing resources worked like a library? You don't buy the books, you check them out when you need them. You return them when you're done. The same book serves multiple people, just not simultaneously. Maximum utility from minimum resources. But computing isn't books, someone in the crowd said. You can't just pass resources around like physical objects. Exactly. That was the problem I had to solve technically. Daniel's marker moved faster now, filling the wall with increasingly complex diagrams. The challenge was creating a system that could allocate, monitor, and reallocate computing resources dynamically across multiple clients in real time, ensuring quality of service while maximizing overall utilization. It required predictive algorithms for usage patterns, instantaneous load balancing, and fail-safes for when predictions were wrong. He stepped back from his diagrams, which now covered a 6-foot section of wall. Beautiful in their complexity, each element connecting to others in ways that suggested both precision and creativity. The breakthrough came from combining 3 different approaches that hadn't been integrated before: machine learning for usage prediction, dynamic partitioning for resource allocation, and an economic model that incentivized off-peak usage through price differentiation. Laura designed the economic model. I built the technical architecture. Together, we created a system where a small architecture firm could run massive rendering jobs at 2 a.m. when capacity was cheap, while a law office could run document analysis at noon when they needed it, and a restaurant chain could process inventory optimization during dinner rush. Different needs, different timing, same infrastructure, all managed automatically. The crowd was completely silent, absorbed. Even Isabel, who'd sat through hundreds of technical presentations, found herself drawn in by the way Daniel explained it, not as abstract technology, but as problem-solving with purpose. By the time we defended the dissertation in June 2014, we had a working prototype, Daniel continued. Laura had already done market analysis. She'd identified 47 potential clients in the Bay Area alone. Small businesses spending a combined $2.1 million annually on inadequate computing solutions. We could serve them all for 30% less than their current costs while providing enterprise-level capability. That's when you started Skylink? The purple-haired woman asked. Daniel nodded. Incorporated in September 2014. Laura and I put in $8,000 each, literally our entire savings. Rented a garage in Sunnyvale for $600 a month. I coded while she handled business development. We launched with one client in November, a small legal firm that needed document processing. They paid us $400 a month. That first payment, he smiled distantly. We took the check to the bank, deposited it, then went to Safeway and bought real groceries for the first time in weeks. Laura cried in the frozen food aisle. People in the crowd were smiling now, caught up in the story's humanity. By January 2015, we had 12 clients and $8,000 in monthly revenue. By March, 27 clients and $32,000. The system worked exactly as designed. Clients were saving money, we were profitable, and the platform was handling the complexity automatically. Laura was pregnant by then. We'd stay up late in the garage, her with a heating pad on her back, me debugging code, both of us dreaming about the future we were building. Daniel's voice had taken on a distant quality, as if he were speaking from somewhere far away and long ago. We called our daughter Grace because that's what Laura said we'd need. Grace to balance the chaos of building a company and raising a child simultaneously. She used to talk to her belly while writing business plans, explaining our strategy to the baby. Your parents are crazy, she'd say, but we're going to build something beautiful for you. The lobby was so quiet that Isabel could hear her own breathing. By May, we had investment offers. Laura evaluated them all with this incredible clarity, not just looking at the money, but at strategic fit, cultural alignment, long-term vision. She chose Clearwater Ventures because their partner, Amy Rodriguez, had built and sold her own company while raising 3 kids. Laura said she wanted investors who understood that business and life weren't separate categories. Daniel turned back to his diagrams on the wall, one hand touching the intricate networks he'd drawn. June 3, 2015, Laura had a meeting in Palo Alto. New potential client, big contract. She was excited. This would be our largest deal yet, the kind that would prove we were ready to scale. She left the office at 1:30, promised she'd be back by 3. We were going to celebrate. There was a bakery in Mountain View that made these amazing tres leches cakes, and I'd ordered one. Stupid romantic gesture. She loved tres leches. His voice fractured slightly. She never made it. El Camino Real, south of Stanford. Semi-truck ran a red light doing 55 miles per hour. Police said she died on impact. They told me that repeatedly, like it was supposed to help. The baby survived because Laura's body... He stopped, swallowing hard. Because she protected her daughter, even in death. Several people in the crowd were openly crying now. Isabel felt tears on her own cheeks. Grace was born by emergency C-section, 2 pounds, 9 ounces. NICU at Stanford for 6 weeks. I'd go from the hospital to the office to the hospital, around and around, holding this tiny person who barely looked real while trying to keep the company running. The investors were sympathetic but practical. They needed leadership. I was supposed to be CTO and CEO, technologist and business strategist, grieving husband and new father, all simultaneously. Daniel sat back down on the floor, suddenly looking exhausted. By August, I was breaking. The company needed capital. We were burning through $80,000 a month with our expanded team. I was pitching investors while running on 2 hours of sleep, showing up to meetings with baby formula stains on my shirt. One VC asked if I'd considered strategic alternatives, code for selling, for giving up. That's when my father approached you, Isabel said quietly. That's when Richard Carter appeared, Daniel confirmed. He'd been watching Skylink for months, understood the technology, saw the potential. He made an offer, acquire the company, provide the capital and expertise we needed. I could stay on as CTO, focus on technology, let his team handle the business side. It seemed like a lifeline. But it wasn't, someone in the crowd said. It was exactly what he said it would be, Daniel corrected gently. The problem was what it required me to become. Richard wanted total control, not just majority stake, but complete ownership. He could have structured a deal that let me keep equity, that made me a true partner. But he knew I was desperate, knew I had a daughter in NICU, medical bills mounting, no sleep, no support system. So he offered $200,000 for my 48%. Fair market value at the time, technically, but we both knew the company was worth more. We both knew I had no leverage. You could have said no, the intern suggested tentatively. Could I? Daniel's smile was sad. Grace was scheduled to come home from NICU on Saturday. I needed to prove stable housing and income. The $200,000 meant I could rent an apartment, cover medical bills, maybe breathe for a minute. Saying no meant, what? Fighting for better terms while my daughter's discharge got delayed? Risking everything on principle while she lay in an incubator? He looked directly at Isabel. Your father didn't steal Skylink. He bought it from someone who couldn't afford to say no. That's not illegal. Arguably, it's not even immoral, just business. The part that hurts is what came after. The systematic erasure, the rewriting of history, taking credit for technology he didn't develop, for innovations he didn't conceive. That's when business becomes something darker. Isabel met his gaze steadily. I'm sorry for what he did, for what I perpetuated by not knowing, by not asking. You were 22, Daniel said. You can't apologize for your father's choices, and you can't blame yourself for not questioning a history that was written before you had power to change it. But I have power now. Isabel stood, brushing off her suit. Which is why we're going to do more than release statements. We're going to fix this. Patterson's emergency board meeting convened at 2 p.m. in the executive conference room. Sleek wood table, leather chairs, walls of screens showing board members who'd dialed in from around the world. Isabel stood at the head of the table, having changed into fresh clothes, but still radiating the exhaustion of someone who'd been awake for 36 hours straight. This meeting is out of order, Patterson began immediately. We have protocols for crisis management, and they don't include the CEO sitting on the lobby floor having group therapy sessions with maintenance staff. Daniel Reed isn't maintenance staff, Dr. Hayes interjected from his seat. He's the co-founder of this company, and maybe if we'd acknowledged that 10 years ago, we wouldn't be in crisis mode now. He sold his shares. He was compensated. The acquisition was legal. Patterson's face was red. What Isabel did this morning, releasing that statement without full board approval, creating unnecessary controversy, was reckless. Our stock is down. Investors are nervous. We have shareholder calls demanding explanation. Good, Isabel said calmly. They should demand explanation, because they deserve the truth from the beginning. The truth? The truth is that Richard Carter built this company from acquisition to empire. That's not revisionist history, it's fact. Patterson gestured sharply. So Daniel Reed did some academic work. So what? Academia is full of brilliant ideas that never become businesses. Richard had the vision to recognize Skylink's potential and the skill to execute at scale. That's the truth that matters. You're right about one thing, Isabel said. My father did scale the company brilliantly, but he built that scale on a foundation he didn't create and then claimed credit for the architecture. That's not vision, that's appropriation. It's business, Patterson shot back. And if you can't tell the difference, you're not qualified to run this company. The room went deadly silent. Sarah Chen, the CFO, looked uncomfortable. Two other board members shifted in their seats, but Hayes leaned forward, his voice cutting. Are you calling for a vote to remove Isabel as CEO? Patterson held Hayes's gaze for a long moment, calculations running behind his eyes. Finally, he sat back. No, but I'm calling for sanity. This company has 10,000 employees worldwide. We serve 3,000 clients. We're responsible to shareholders, to customers, to the people who depend on us. We can't blow all that up over guilt about an acquisition from a decade ago. I'm not blowing anything up, Isabel said. I'm doing what should have been done from the start, acknowledging where we came from. And more than that, I'm going to make it right. She pressed a button on the table's control panel, and a presentation appeared on the screens. Here's what we're going to do. First, establish the Laura Chen Reed Memorial Scholarship, full funding for employee children pursuing STEM education, starting with $5 million annually. Second, commission a proper history of Vertex Dynamics that includes Skylink's founding and Daniel Reed's contributions. Third, rename our main innovation lab the Reed Innovation Center, with a dedication ceremony next month. That's a lot of symbolic gestures, Patterson said dismissively. I'm not finished. Fourth, I'm offering Daniel Reed a position as Chief Innovation Officer, reporting directly to me. Flexible hours to accommodate his family needs. Full benefits, competitive salary, equity package commensurate with a C-suite position. He can work on whatever projects interest him, with full autonomy and resources. The room erupted in overlapping voices. Patterson was the loudest. You're giving a maintenance worker a C-suite position based on work he did a decade ago? Based on work that literally built this company, Isabel corrected sharply. And he's not a maintenance worker. He's a PhD who's been wasting his talent because we made him invisible. If we can't see the value in reclaiming that brilliance, then we deserve to fail. This is insanity. This is justice, Hayes interrupted. Delayed, inadequate, but still justice. And if the board can't see that, then I'll tender my resignation alongside Isabel's when you vote to remove her. See how Wall Street reacts when you lose your CEO and CTO in the same day over a crisis of conscience. Patterson's jaw worked silently. Finally, he exhaled. What makes you think Reed will even accept? He walked away from this world. Maybe he doesn't want back in. Maybe not, Isabel acknowledged. That's his choice, but we owe him the option. And honestly, if he chooses to keep fixing air conditioners because that's what makes him happy, that would be the most dignified ending to this story. But we have to offer. We have to try. The vote, when it came, was 5-3 in favor of Isabel's proposals. Close enough to be uncomfortable, but sufficient. Patterson abstained, his face tight with disapproval. After the meeting ended and the screens went dark, Isabel remained at the table. Hayes approached, settling into the chair beside her. Your father would have handled this differently, he said. I know, he would have contained it, minimized damage, protected the narrative. Isabel looked at the older man. Do you think I'm making a mistake? I think you're making a choice between being right and being comfortable. Most people choose comfortable. Hayes smiled slightly. Richard did usually, but you're willing to pay the price for being right. That's rare. Painful, but rare. Will Daniel accept? I don't know. That's a man who spent 10 years deliberately choosing small, choosing quiet, choosing his daughter over everything else. Offering him a C-suite position might feel like asking him to abandon the life he's built. Then what should I do? Hayes stood, moving toward the door. Ask him anyway. Give him the choice. And if he says no, respect it. But make sure he knows the offer is real, not corporate theater, not guilt management. Real recognition that his work mattered and still matters. Isabel found Daniel in the third-floor maintenance room just after 3 p.m. He was packing up his toolbox with methodical efficiency, clearly preparing to leave for the day. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. Miss Carter, I thought you'd be in meetings all afternoon. I was. We just finished. Isabel leaned against the door frame, suddenly feeling the full weight of her exhaustion. Do you have a minute? Daniel glanced at the wall clock, 3:14 p.m. I need to leave by 3:20 to get Grace on time, but until then, sure. I'll be quick. The board approved several initiatives this afternoon. Scholarship fund in Laura's name, renamed Innovation Lab. Official company history that tells the truth about Skylink. She paused. And we'd like to offer you a position. Chief Innovation Officer, C-suite level, full benefits, equity package. You'd work on whatever projects interest you, with total autonomy, flexible hours. You could be home by 3:30 every day if that's what you need. Daniel set down his toolbox slowly. That's generous. Unexpected. It's not generosity. It's recognition of what you built and what you could still build. Your dissertation's work on distributed computing was 10 years ago, but the field has exploded since then. AI integration, edge computing, quantum applications, there are new problems that need your kind of thinking. Ms. Carter. Isabel. Please. Isabel, Daniel corrected. I appreciate this, truly, but I need to think about it. This morning I was fixing HVAC units. Now you're offering me a corner office. That's a lot of change very fast. I understand. Take whatever time you need. Isabel straightened. But Daniel, I want you to know this isn't charity or corporate PR. We need what you can do. Not what you did 10 years ago. What you can do now, today. With all the wisdom and experience you've gained, including the wisdom of knowing what actually matters. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Can I be honest? Please. Part of me wants to say yes immediately. The part that's still that 28-year-old PhD student who thought he could change the world. The part that wants Grace to see her father as someone more than a guy who fixes things. He picked up his toolbox. But another part of me is terrified because I've spent 10 years building a life that works. Simple, modest, but stable. Grace has never gone hungry, never worried about rent, never questioned whether her father would be there at 3:30. Saying yes to your offer means risking that stability. It doesn't have to, Isabel said. We can structure it however you need. Guaranteed hours, protected time, safety nets. That's not what I mean. Daniel moved to the door, and Isabel stepped aside. The risk isn't financial. It's identity. Right now, I'm Grace's dad who happens to work at Vertex. If I become Chief Innovation Officer, I become Daniel Reed, the tech executive who happens to have a daughter. The center of gravity shifts, and I'm not sure I want that. He started down the hallway, and Isabel walked with him. But here's what I do want, Daniel continued. I want Grace to know her mother's work mattered. That the dream Laura and I shared wasn't just a footnote in someone else's success story. I want her to apply to Stanford's engineering program next year and be able to write about parents who built something real, not just a tragedy that defined her childhood. They reached the elevator. Daniel pressed the button. So I'm going to go pick up my daughter. We're going to have dinner, probably pasta. It's Thursday. And I'm going to tell her about the conversation we had this morning, about the statement you released, about what her mother and I created together. And then, over the next few days, Grace and I are going to talk about what comes next. Because this decision isn't just mine. It affects her life too. The elevator doors opened. Daniel stepped in, then turned back. I'll give you an answer by Monday. That enough time? Take as long as you need, Isabel said. Monday, Daniel repeated. And Isabel? Thank you for seeing what was invisible. That means more than you know. The doors closed. Isabel stood alone in the hallway, staring at her reflection in the polished steel. She looked different somehow, younger despite the exhaustion, or maybe just more uncertain. For 10 years, she'd known exactly who she was and what she was building. Now, in less than 24 hours, that certainty had shattered. But somehow, standing there in the empty hallway of the empire her father built, Isabel felt more alive than she had in years. The truth was messy and uncomfortable and expensive, but it was true. And maybe, just maybe, that mattered more than she'd ever understood. Daniel drove to Grace's school in silence, his mind churning through the previous 48 hours like a processor stuck in an infinite loop. The March afternoon was bright and clear, the kind of California day that tourists imagined and locals took for granted. But Daniel barely noticed. His hands gripped the steering wheel of his 12-year-old Honda Civic, and in his mind he kept replaying Isabel Carter's words. Chief Innovation Officer, C-suite level, full autonomy. He pulled into the pickup lane at Fremont High School at exactly 3:27 p.m., 3 minutes early as always. Other parents idled in their cars, some scrolling phones, others chatting through open windows. Daniel recognized most of them by now. 5 years of daily pickups created a kind of silent community. The woman in the Tesla who always wore workout clothes. The grandfather in the old Buick who picked up twin sophomores. The harried father in the work van who arrived exactly at 3:31 every day, perpetually late but trying. Grace emerged from the main entrance at 3:32, right on schedule. She was tall like Daniel, with her mother's delicate features and an expression of fierce intelligence that could shift to warmth in an instant. Today she practically ran to the car, her backpack bouncing, eyes bright with excitement. "Dad!" She yanked open the passenger door and threw herself into the seat. "Everyone's talking about it. Like, everyone. Mrs. Chen showed us the article in AP Government. Tommy's mom texted him the Bloomberg story. Emma's older sister works at Apple, and she said her entire team is discussing it. Dad, you're famous!" Daniel pulled out of the parking lot, navigating the afternoon traffic with automatic precision. "I'm not famous, sweetheart. You're trending on Twitter. I checked at lunch. Number 4 in the United States. Behind some actress drama and the new iPhone announcement, but ahead of the president's thing about tariffs." Grace was scrolling her phone frantically. There are articles in TechCrunch, Wired, the New York Times. People are calling you a forgotten genius. Someone made a Reddit thread collecting your academic citations. Apparently your dissertation has been referenced in 247 papers, but nobody knew you were the same Daniel Reed who founded Skylink because you just disappeared. She looked up from her phone, her expression suddenly vulnerable beneath the excitement. "Why didn't you tell me? I mean, I knew you had a PhD. I knew you and Mom started a company, but you never said—" Her voice caught. "You never told me you built something that big, that important." Daniel took a breath, choosing his words carefully. They'd had versions of this conversation before, but never with this intensity, never with the weight of public revelation behind it. "Because I didn't want you to think I'd given up something for you. I wanted you to understand that you were the choice, not the consolation prize." He glanced at her. "After your mom died, I had to decide what kind of father I wanted to be. Present or successful. Simple or complicated. I chose present. I chose simple. And I've never regretted it." "But you could have been both," Grace said quietly. "You could have kept working in tech and still been a good dad." "Maybe. Probably not the way I wanted to be. Not home by 3:30 every single day. Not making breakfast every morning. Not helping with homework at the kitchen table." Daniel turned onto their street, a modest neighborhood of small houses and chain-link fences. "Grace, you need to understand something. When I sold my shares in Skylink, I wasn't giving up my career. I was choosing to build something different, smaller, maybe, but no less important." They pulled into the driveway of their rental house, a 2-bedroom bungalow painted pale yellow, with a tiny yard and a porch swing that Daniel had installed the year they'd moved in. It wasn't much. The kitchen was cramped. The water heater made strange noises. but it was home. Inside, Grace dropped her backpack by the door and followed Daniel to the kitchen. He pulled out ingredients for pasta with mechanical familiarity. It was Thursday, which meant spaghetti with marinara and the garlic bread Grace loved. These rhythms had sustained them for a decade. "So, what happens now?" Grace asked, perching on the counter the way she'd done since she was small enough that her legs dangled. "Mrs. Chen said this could be a big deal legally. Like, if your work was stolen, it wasn't stolen," Daniel interrupted gently, filling a pot with water. "I sold it. Legally, clearly, with lawyers and contracts. Your mom's estate got compensated. The other investors got bought out. Everything was above board. But you got screwed. I got $200,000 when I desperately needed it, which let me bring you home from the hospital and keep you safe and fed. That's not getting screwed. That's making a choice under pressure." Grace was quiet for a moment, watching him work. Then, "Ms. Carter offered you a job, didn't she?" Daniel's hand stilled on the pasta box. "How did you know?" "Because that's what happens in these stories. The wronged person gets vindicated, and the company tries to make it right. Plus, Emma's sister said her boss was speculating about it." Grace's voice was carefully neutral. "What did she offer?" "Chief Innovation Officer, executive position, good salary, equity, full benefits. I could work on whatever projects interested me." Daniel set the pot on the stove. "Flexible hours. Home by 3:30 if I wanted." "That's huge, Dad. That's getting your life back." "I have my life. This life. With you." "But it's not the life you were supposed to have," Grace said, and her voice cracked. "It's not the life Mom wanted for you." Daniel turned to face his daughter fully. She was 15, caught in that impossible space between child and adult, old enough to understand loss, but young enough to still need her father's certainty. Tears were sliding down her cheeks. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" "I'm the reason you gave everything up." The words tumbled out, years of unspoken guilt finally breaking free. "If Mom hadn't been pregnant, if I hadn't been born, you could have kept the company. You could have been successful. You could have—" "Stop." Daniel crossed to her in 2 strides, pulling her into a fierce hug. "Listen to me. You are not the reason for anything except the best 10 years of my life. You didn't take anything from me. You gave me purpose when I'd lost everything else. You gave me a reason to get up every morning. You gave me joy." Grace sobbed against his shoulder, all the teenage composure dissolving into the child who still needed reassurance that she was wanted, valued, loved beyond measure. "But I see how you look sometimes," she whispered, "when I ask about Stanford, or engineering, or your research. You get this expression, like you're remembering something far away, something you lost. And I know I'm the reason you lost it." "No." Daniel pulled back, holding her face in his hands so she had to meet his eyes. "You want to know what I'm remembering? I'm remembering your mother, how she used to talk about you before you were born, how she'd rest her hand on her belly and tell you about the world we were building, how she made me promise in those last weeks of her pregnancy that if anything ever happened to her, I'd make sure you knew how wanted you were, how loved." He brushed tears from her cheeks. "Every single choice I've made since the day she died has been about keeping that promise. Selling Skylink wasn't giving up my dreams. It was choosing to honor hers. She wanted you to have a father who was present, not distracted. She wanted you to grow up secure, not anxious. She wanted you to see that success isn't measured in stock prices or job titles, but in the quality of the life you build." "But what if I want more for you?" Grace asked. "What if I want my dad to be the person he was supposed to be?" "Then we need to talk about what that means." Daniel released her, turning back to the stove to hide his own emotion. "Because Ms. Carter's offer isn't simple. It's not just a job. It's a fundamental change in our life. More money, sure, more prestige, but also more pressure, more time, more of me being Daniel Reed the executive instead of just your dad." He added pasta to the now boiling water, the familiar ritual steadying him. "I need to understand what you want from this. Not what you think I want. Not what you think your mother would have wanted. What Grace Reed, 15 years old, actually wants for our future." Grace was quiet for a long time. Daniel could hear the clock ticking, the water bubbling, traffic passing on the street outside. Finally, his daughter spoke. "I want you to have the choice. I don't want you to say no because you think I need you to be small. I don't want you to turn down opportunities because you're afraid of changing our life. She hopped down from the counter, standing beside him. Dad, I'm 15. In 3 years, I'll be at college. You've spent a decade building your world around my schedule, my needs, my life. But I'm not going to need 3:30 pickups forever. And when I'm gone, I don't want you to be alone in this house, fixing other people's air conditioners, wondering what you could have built if you'd said yes. Daniel stirred the pasta, his throat tight. So here's what I think, Grace continued. I think you should take the job. I think you should show the world what you're capable of. I think you should let me see my father be brilliant, not just steady. And I think, her voice wavered, I think Mom would want that too. She didn't marry you because you were safe. She married you because you were brilliant and passionate and you believed you could change the world. That person is still in there. And maybe it's time to let him out. They ate dinner at their small kitchen table. The conversation gradually shifting to easier topics. Grace's upcoming physics test, a friend's drama, the persistent leak in the bathroom sink that Daniel kept meaning to fix properly. But underneath the normalcy, something had shifted. A door had opened. Later, after Grace went to her room to study, Daniel sat alone on the back porch. The yard was dark, the neighboring houses showing warm yellow windows against the night. He pulled out his phone and stared at the contact information Isabel had sent him. Just her direct email and cell number, no corporate layers or assistant gatekeepers. He typed slowly. Need to understand what Chief Innovation Officer actually means. What would I work on? What's expected? What's the catch? The response came within minutes. No catch. You'd have a lab, a budget, and freedom to pursue whatever interests you. Quantum computing integration, next-gen resource allocation, theoretical work that might not pay off for years. Your choice. We'd want your perspective on strategy, but you'd report only to me. The goal isn't to put you in meetings. It's to let you build again. Daniel read the message 3 times, then, why? You released the statement, created the scholarship. You've done what's right. Why go further? Isabel's response took longer this time. Because I've spent the day watching our engineers sit on the lobby floor listening to you explain cloud architecture like it's poetry. Because Dr. Hayes said you were potentially the defining technologist of your generation, and we let you fix HVAC for 7 years. Because Grace deserves to see her father do what he was born to do. And selfishly, because I think you could help Vertex be what it should have been from the start, not just successful, but meaningful. Daniel set down his phone and looked up at the stars. They were faint here, washed out by city lights, but still visible if you knew where to look. Laura used to say that's what good technology should be, invisible infrastructure that let people see what mattered. Grace had inherited her mother's clarity, her ability to cut through noise to truth. The next 3 days passed in a strange suspension. Daniel went to work each morning, but the job had transformed. People recognized him now, not as the maintenance guy, but as someone who mattered. Engineers would stop him in hallways to ask technical questions. The intern with purple hair brought him coffee and asked about machine learning applications. Dr. Hayes invited him to sit in on a strategy meeting about quantum computing partnerships. Isabel kept her distance, respecting his space to think. But Daniel could feel her attention, the way you can feel someone watching from across a room. She was waiting for an answer, and the whole company seemed to be holding its breath with her. Grace watched him carefully too, studying his face at breakfast, asking subtle questions about his day. She was trying to read his decision before he'd made it, the way teenagers did when they were terrified of hoping. Friday evening, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, old school, Laura's preferred method for big decisions. He drew a line down the middle. Left side, reasons to stay as he was. Right side, reasons to accept Isabel's offer. The left side filled quickly. Stability, routine, no risk. Home by 3:30, simple life, known quantities, the comfort of smallness. The right side was harder. He wrote Grace's pride first, then crossed it out. That couldn't be the reason. Wrote Laura's dream and crossed that out too. Finally, slowly, he wrote, because unfinished work haunts you, because brilliance unused becomes regret, because Grace needs to see that it's never too late to rebuild. And then, in smaller letters, because you're not done yet. Saturday morning, he called Isabel. She answered on the second ring. Daniel, have you decided? I need to see the lab first, the actual space where I'd work. And I need to meet the team I'd be working with. His voice was steady. If I do this, I need to know it's real. Not corporate theater. Not a PR move that'll fade in 6 months. Monday morning, 9 a.m. I'll show you everything. A pause. Should I be hopeful? You should be patient. I'm still figuring this out. Monday arrived with the weight of consequence. Daniel put on clothes he hadn't worn in years, khakis and a button-down shirt, the professional uniform he'd abandoned a decade ago. Grace saw him at breakfast and grinned. You look like a professor. I look uncomfortable. You look like yourself. The version from old pictures with Mom. Grace poured herself cereal. Dad, whatever you decide today, I'm proud of you. For even considering it. For being brave enough to imagine something different. Daniel drove to Vertex headquarters in the Honda Civic, acutely aware of how out of place the aging car looked in a parking lot full of Teslas and BMWs. He'd never parked in the main lot before. Maintenance used the lower level. The shift felt symbolic, crossing a threshold. Isabel met him in the lobby, dressed in jeans and a simple blouse, deliberately casual, Daniel noticed, trying to put him at ease, or maybe trying to signal this wasn't just business. Thank you for coming, she said. Ready for the tour? They took the elevator to the 15th floor. The doors opened onto an entire wing that Daniel had never seen. Open floor plan, glass walls, workstations equipped with high-end computers and development tools. But what caught his attention was the far corner, where walls of whiteboards flanked a large open space. This would be your lab, Isabel said, leading him forward. 2,000 square feet. Private office if you want it, but most of the space is collaborative. Whiteboard walls, obviously. I remembered you drawing diagrams in the lobby. High-performance computing cluster dedicated solely to this lab. Budget for equipment, hiring, research partnerships, whatever you need. Daniel walked slowly through the space, his mind automatically filling it with possibilities. Workstations here, server racks there. Whiteboards for brainstorming, comfortable chairs for the long thinking sessions that produced breakthroughs. Who would I work with? That's up to you. We can pull engineers from existing teams, hire new people, partner with universities. Dr. Hayes suggested you might want to recruit some of your old Stanford colleagues, people who understood your original work. Isabel leaned against a whiteboard. The only requirement is that you keep me informed. Not micromanaged, just regular updates. I want to understand what you're building. What's the business objective? What's the deliverable? Innovation. Isabel smiled slightly. I know that sounds vague, but Daniel, we've been coasting, iterating on the foundation you built 10 years ago, making incremental improvements. We're successful, but we're not pioneering. I want Vertex to be what it was supposed to be when my father acquired Skylink, a place where the impossible becomes possible. Daniel turned to face her fully. You understand this might not work. I've been out of active research for a decade. The field has moved. I might be irrelevant. You explained distributed computing to a lobby full of engineers, and they were riveted. You're not irrelevant. Isabel crossed her arms. But let's be honest about what this really is. This isn't just about what you can do for Vertex. This is about what Vertex owes you. Recognition, opportunity, resources. We took your foundation and built an empire. The least we can do is give you the tools to build again. That's guilt talking. That's justice talking. Isabel's voice was firm. And yes, there's guilt too. My father's and mine. But guilt isn't why this lab exists. This exists because I watched 40 engineers sit on the floor to hear you teach, and I realized we've been wasting the most valuable resource in the building. Daniel walked to the window. 15 floors below, San Jose sprawled in every direction, tech campuses and highways, strip malls and neighborhoods, millions of lives intersecting in patterns too complex to fully comprehend. Somewhere down there, Grace was in AP Physics, learning equations that Daniel had once mastered and then set aside. I need one guarantee, he said quietly. Name it. If I fail, if I take this job and can't deliver, if I'm rusty or outdated or just not capable anymore, you let me go with dignity. No pity, no manufactured projects to justify the salary. Just an honest assessment. And if I'm not adding value, we part ways professionally. Agreed. But Daniel, Isabel moved to stand beside him at the window. I don't think you're going to fail. I think you're going to remember what it feels like to build something beautiful. And I think Grace is going to see her father become the person her mother fell in love with. Daniel closed his eyes. He could almost hear Laura's voice, the way she'd sounded when they'd sat in that garage in Sunnyvale, sketching dreams on whiteboards. We're going to change everything, she used to say. Just watch. He opened his eyes and looked at Isabel. I'll take the job, but I want to start small. Part-time at first. Mornings only. Home by 2:30. Let me prove I can still do this before we commit fully. If after 3 months it's working, we transition to full-time. If it's not, we acknowledge the experiment failed and move on. Deal. Isabel extended her hand. Daniel shook it, feeling the moment's weight. This was a threshold, a door opening onto a path he'd thought was closed forever. Terror and exhilaration mixed in equal measure. When do I start? How about now? Isabel gestured to the whiteboard walls. Show me what you're thinking, what problems interest you, what you'd work on if you had unlimited resources and no constraints. Daniel picked up a marker, red, his favorite color for brainstorming. He approached the pristine white surface with the hesitation of someone who hadn't done this in years. Then muscle memory took over. His hand moved, sketching the first diagram. Quantum computing integration with classical cloud architecture, he began, his voice gaining confidence. Everyone's treating quantum as a separate domain. But what if we could create a hybrid system where quantum processors handle specific computational tasks within a classical framework, not replacing traditional computing, but augmenting it at the exact points where quantum advantage exists? The marker flew across the whiteboard, creating networks and nodes and elegant mathematical notations. Isabel watched, saying nothing, as Daniel filled the board with 10 years of suppressed thinking. The challenge is resource allocation, determining in real time which tasks benefit from quantum processing and routing them appropriately while maintaining classical efficiency for everything else. It requires predictive algorithms even more sophisticated than what Laura and I developed for Skylink, but the theoretical framework is similar. Flow management, dynamic allocation, understanding the natural pressure points in computational systems. He stepped back, looking at what he'd created. The whiteboard was covered in dense technical work, beautiful in its complexity. It looked like the diagrams he used to create in the Stanford lab, before tragedy rewrote his life. This is preliminary, he said, suddenly self-conscious. Probably naive. I'd need to review current literature, understand where the field actually is. It's brilliant, Isabel interrupted, and it's exactly what we need. Someone who can see the big picture, not just the next quarter's incremental improvement. Daniel set down the marker, his hands trembling slightly. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed this, the pure intellectual pleasure of attacking hard problems, of believing he could change the world through elegant solutions. Can I ask you something? Isabel said softly. Of course. Are you scared? Daniel laughed, surprised by the question's directness. Terrified. I'm 41 years old, a decade out of practice, about to work with people who probably learned quantum computing in grad school while I was fixing air conditioners. I'm scared I'll embarrass myself, scared I'll prove I'm irrelevant, scared I'll let Grace down if this doesn't work. But you're doing it anyway. Grace told me she wants to see her father be brilliant, not just steady. How do you say no to that? Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. And honestly, I'm tired of being small. I chose it. I don't regret it. But that chapter is finished. Grace is 15, becoming her own person. She doesn't need me home by 3:30 anymore. Maybe it's time I figure out who I am when I'm not just Grace's dad. Isabel nodded slowly. My father used to say that the hardest thing about success is knowing when to stop proving yourself. But I think he had it backwards. The hardest thing is knowing when to start proving yourself again. When to risk being vulnerable after you've built something safe. They stood together in the empty lab, looking at the whiteboard filled with Daniel's dreams. Outside, the city hummed with the ordinary chaos of a Monday morning. But in this space, something new was being born. Something that had died 10 years ago and was now, impossibly, finding its way back to life. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Grace. Did you do it? Did you say yes? He typed back, I said yes, part-time at first, baby steps. Her response was immediate. Dad, I'm so proud of you. Mom would be too. Daniel stared at those words, feeling something break open in his chest. Grief and hope tangled together in a way that hurt and healed simultaneously. Laura would never see this, would never know that the dream they'd started in a Sunnyvale garage had survived, transformed, and was being born again in a glass tower 15 stories above San Jose. But Grace would see it. Grace would watch her father rebuild, and maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Thank you, Daniel said to Isabel, for seeing what was invisible, for making space for this, for... He gestured helplessly at the lab, the whiteboard, the possibility. For all of it. Thank me by building something amazing, Isabel replied. Something Laura would be proud of, something that proves the best work comes not from never falling, but from getting back up. Daniel picked up the marker again, turning back to the whiteboard. There was so much to figure out, so many problems to solve. But for the first time in 10 years, he felt like himself. Not the grieving husband or the protective father or the invisible maintenance worker. Just Daniel Reed, 41 years old, PhD from Stanford, co-founder of the company that became Vertex Dynamics, father to an extraordinary daughter, widower of the woman who taught him that love and ambition weren't opposites, but partners, and now, impossibly, chief innovation officer with a lab of his own and a whiteboard full of dreams. He began to write. 3 months passed like water through cupped hands, swift and impossible to hold, yet leaving everything changed in its wake. Spring turned to early summer in the Bay Area, the hills browning under California's sun, while tech campuses bloomed with the particular energy of possibility that characterized Silicon Valley at its best. Daniel's mornings developed a new rhythm. He'd wake at 6, make coffee in the small kitchen while Grace got ready for school, drive her to campus by 7:30, and arrive at Vertex by 8. The 15th floor lab had transformed from an empty space into something alive. Whiteboards covered in evolving equations, 3 workstations humming with computational models, and a small team of researchers Daniel had assembled with Isabel's blessing. There was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a quantum computing specialist from Berkeley who'd read Daniel's dissertation in grad school and called it foundational. James Martinez, a 26-year-old prodigy who dropped out of MIT to work on edge computing and brought in a reverence that kept the team grounded. And Sarah Kim, a systems architect who'd spent 5 years at Google before deciding she wanted to work on problems that mattered more than ad optimization. They were brilliant, hungry, and young enough to believe the impossible was just difficult. Daniel felt ancient around them some days, his decade away from cutting-edge research obvious in the moments when they referenced papers he'd never read or techniques he'd never encountered. But they treated him with a respect that had nothing to do with his title and everything to do with how he thought, the way he could see patterns in chaos, find elegant solutions to tangled problems, ask the one question that reframed everything. You think like a composer, Yuki had told him one afternoon, watching Daniel sketch system architectures on the whiteboard. Not notes, but music. Not components, but symphonies. Daniel had laughed at the grandiosity, but Grace had smiled when he told her about it that evening. Mom used to say the same thing, that you saw beauty where other people saw math. The quantum integration project was progressing faster than anyone had expected. What Daniel had sketched on the whiteboard that first morning had evolved into a working prototype. A hybrid system that could route computational tasks between classical and quantum processors with 92% efficiency. It was early-stage proof-of-concept work, but the implications were staggering. If they could scale it, cloud computing would transform yet again, this time with Daniel's name attached from the beginning. Isabel visited the lab twice a week, usually in the mornings, sitting in on team meetings with an intensity that reminded Daniel of Laura. She asked sharp questions, pushed back on assumptions, and somehow managed to make her presence feel collaborative rather than supervisory. The company's stock had recovered from its initial dip and was now trading higher than ever, buoyed by investor excitement about Vertex's renewed focus on innovation. Patterson had been conspicuously silent, though Daniel knew from Isabel that the board member was simply waiting for any sign of failure. Let him wait. Daniel wasn't doing this to prove anything to Patterson or the board or even to Silicon Valley. He was doing it because at 41, he'd rediscovered something he thought he'd lost forever, the joy of building. But the real transformation was happening in smaller, quieter moments. Grace had started visiting the lab after school, ostensibly to do homework in Daniel's office, but really to absorb the atmosphere. She'd sit at the small desk Daniel had brought in, physics textbooks spread before her, while through the glass walls she could see her father working with his team. Daniel would catch her watching sometimes, her expression a mixture of pride and wonder, as if she were seeing him for the first time. One Thursday in late May, Grace looked up from her calculus homework and said, "I'm writing my Stanford application essay about you and Mom." Daniel's hand stilled on his keyboard. "What?" "The prompt is about overcoming adversity. I'm writing about how you built something beautiful with Mom, lost it all, and then had the courage to build again." Grace's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. "Is that okay? I know it's personal." "It's more than okay." Daniel crossed to her desk, kneeling beside her chair. "What are you saying about your mom?" "That she was brilliant and fierce and saw possibilities other people missed. That she married you because you could match her vision with execution. That together you created something that changed an entire industry, even though someone else got credit." Grace paused. "And I'm writing about how her death could have ended the story, but you chose to keep building, just in a different way. You built me. Made sure I grew up secure and loved and believing I could do anything. That's a different kind of innovation, but maybe more important." Daniel's throat tightened. "Grace, and I'm writing about now," she continued, "about how watching you return to your work has taught me that it's never too late to reclaim yourself. That taking time to be a parent doesn't mean giving up who you are. It means choosing what matters most in each season of your life." She met his eyes. "You were exactly the father I needed, and now you're showing me how to be brave enough to want more." Daniel pulled her into a hug, this young woman who was somehow still his little girl and also becoming someone extraordinary in her own right. "Your mother would be so proud of you." "I know, but Dad, I'm proud of you too." The first week of June brought an invitation that Daniel had been simultaneously expecting and dreading. Stanford's computer science department was hosting a symposium on distributed computing, and Dr. Hayes had arranged for Daniel to be the keynote speaker. It would be his first major public appearance as Chief Innovation Officer, his first time addressing the academic community that had trained him and then watched him vanish. "You don't have to do this," Isabel said when Daniel mentioned his nervousness. They were in her office reviewing the quarterly innovation report before it went to the board. "We can find a graceful way to decline." "No, I need to do it." Daniel set down the report. "I disappeared from this world for 10 years. People deserve to know why. And honestly, I need to prove to myself that I can still contribute, that I didn't just get lucky once." "You've already proven that. The quantum integration work is exceptional." "That's internal. This is different. This is standing in front of the people who knew me before. Professors, former colleagues, researchers who've been building on my dissertation while I was fixing HVAC units. This is facing the fact that I walked away." Daniel's voice dropped. "And explaining why that was the right choice even though it hurt." Isabel studied him carefully. "What if they judge you? What if they think you wasted your potential?" "Then I'll tell them the truth. That I chose love over ambition, and I'd do it again." Daniel smiled slightly. "Besides, Grace is coming. She wants to see her father give an academic lecture. I can't back out now." The symposium fell on a Friday in mid-June. Daniel spent the previous week preparing his presentation, balancing technical depth with accessibility, trying to weave together past and present into a coherent narrative. The night before, Grace helped him practice in their living room, offering teenage brutal honesty about which slides were boring and which moments felt genuine. "Talk about Mom more," she suggested. "People know the business story now, but they don't know the partnership, the way you work together." Daniel revised the presentation one final time, adding slides about Laura's contributions, her economic modeling, her strategic vision, her ability to translate technical innovation into market opportunity. It felt right, giving her voice space in a story that had erased her for too long. Stanford's auditorium held 300 people and was standing room only by the time Daniel arrived. He recognized faces scattered throughout the crowd, former classmates, professors who'd aged a decade, researchers he'd known during his graduate years. Dr. Hayes sat in the front row beside Isabel. And there, near the middle, Grace sat between two of Daniel's team members, her face glowing with anticipation. The department chair introduced him with a biography that sounded like it belonged to someone else. Dr. Daniel Reed, co-founder of Skylink Systems, Chief Innovation Officer at Vertex Dynamics, author of one of the most cited dissertations in distributed computing history. We're honored to welcome him back to Stanford after a decade away from public research. Daniel walked to the podium, his hands steady, despite the nerves churning in his stomach. The auditorium fell silent. "Thank you for that introduction," he began, though I should clarify something immediately. I wasn't away from research for a decade. I was doing the most important research of my life, studying how to raise a brilliant, kind, curious daughter, while grieving the woman who should have been beside me. That research didn't produce papers, but it produced something more valuable. He clicked to the first slide. A photo of Laura, young and vibrant, standing in the Sunnyvale garage, with whiteboards covered in equations behind her. This is Laura Chen Reed, my wife, my partner, the co-founder of Skylink Systems. She died in 2015, 6 months pregnant, on her way to close what would have been our biggest client deal. Everything I'm about to tell you about distributed computing, about innovation, about building systems that serve everyone, rather than just the powerful, all of it came from conversations with Laura. She saw the problems. I built the solutions. Together we created something that changed an industry. Daniel spoke for 45 minutes, weaving technical content with personal history. He explained the theoretical framework of adaptive resource allocation, but he also talked about working in a garage with a pregnant wife who refused to let physical discomfort slow her strategic thinking. He detailed the quantum integration work his team was pioneering, but he also acknowledged the decade he'd spent away, the choice he'd made to prioritize his daughter over his career. "People have asked me if I regret walking away," Daniel said, nearing the end of his presentation. "If I feel like I wasted my potential. The answer is complicated. Do I wish Laura were alive every single day? Do I wish I'd had the resources and support to continue my research while raising Grace? Of course. But do I regret choosing to be present for my daughter during the years she needed me most? Never. Not for a second." He clicked to a new slide. Grace at 3 years old, covered in flour while they made pancakes. Grace at 7, accepting a science fair award. Grace at 12, reading on their porch swing. Grace at 15, standing in Daniel's lab, looking at equations on the whiteboard with her mother's intensity in her eyes. This is what I built with my decade away. A human being who believes she can change the world. A daughter who knows she was loved completely, without reservation, without resentment. A young woman who's applying to Stanford's engineering program next year with the confidence that comes from watching her father choose what mattered most, even when it cost him everything else. Daniel's voice thickened with emotion. So yes, I lost 10 years of academic research. I lost professional connections, industry relevance, the momentum that drives most careers. But I gained something infinitely more valuable. I became the father Laura wanted me to be. And now, because my daughter is old enough to not need me every moment, I get to build again. Not instead of being her father, but in addition to it. That's not compromise. That's wisdom. The auditorium was completely silent. Daniel clicked to his final slide. Laura's photo beside his recent work on quantum integration, past and present united. Laura used to say that the best code is invisible. It works perfectly, and nobody notices because they're too busy using what it enables. I think the same is true of good parenting. You build infrastructure that lets your child flourish, and if you do it right, they never see the scaffolding. They just see possibilities. That's what I tried to build for Grace, and that's what Laura and I tried to build with Skylink, infrastructure that made the impossible accessible. He looked directly at Grace in the audience. So thank you for this opportunity to return to public research. Thank you for remembering my work even when I disappeared. But most of all, thank you for understanding that sometimes the most important building we do is invisible to everyone except the people we love. The applause started slowly, then swelled until the entire auditorium was standing. Daniel saw professors with tears in their eyes, saw young researchers looking at him with new understanding, saw Dr. Hayes nodding with quiet approval, and saw Grace, his extraordinary daughter, clapping with her hands above her head, her face radiant with pride. After the presentation, people surrounded Daniel, old colleagues, curious students, researchers who wanted to discuss his quantum integration work. But Daniel kept one eye on Grace, who was talking animatedly with Yuki and James, clearly explaining something about her own physics project with the confidence of someone who'd grown up believing her ideas mattered. Isabel appeared at Daniel's elbow during a rare lull. That was remarkable. Half the people here are crying and the other half want to recruit you away from Vertex. I'm not going anywhere, Daniel said. We have work to finish. Good. Because I have something to show you. Isabel handed him her phone, displaying an email. From Amy Rodriguez, remember her? She was Laura's investor at Clearwater Ventures. Daniel skimmed the email, his eyes widening. Amy had watched his presentation via live stream and wanted to discuss a major initiative, a venture fund specifically designed to support technical founders going through life transitions. Grief, parenthood, health crises, caregiving responsibilities. The fund would provide not just capital, but comprehensive support, ensuring that brilliant people didn't have to choose between their work and their humanity. She wants to name it the Laura Chen Reed Innovation Fund, Isabel said softly. She's committing $50 million to start, and she wants you and me to serve on the advisory board, help identify founders who need support, provide mentorship, make sure nobody else has to sell their dreams for $200,000 because they're desperate. Daniel stared at the email, unable to speak. This was Laura's vision, realized in a way she never could have imagined. Not just building a company, but creating infrastructure that helped others build, making the impossible accessible, invisible support that enabled visible brilliance. What do you think? Isabel asked. I think Laura would love it. Daniel's voice broke. I think she'd probably have suggested it herself if she'd lived. Then let's do it. Let's turn this tragedy into something that prevents future tragedies. Let's make sure brilliant people with impossible circumstances get the support you deserved 10 years ago. Daniel nodded, unable to trust his voice. Across the room, Grace caught his eye and gave him a thumbs up. She was radiant, alive with possibility, everything he and Laura had dreamed she'd become. The summer unfolded with a strange perfection that Daniel kept expecting to shatter. The quantum integration project hit major milestones, attracting attention from academic journals and tech media. The Laura Chen Reed Innovation Fund officially launched in July with a ceremony at Stanford, drawing founders and investors who shared stories of their own impossible choices. Grace spent her summer doing an internship in Daniel's lab, working alongside Yuki on computational modeling while preparing her college applications. And Daniel, for the first time in a decade, allowed himself to hope. Not the desperate hope of the grieving husband or the anxious hope of the single father, but the expansive hope of someone who'd been broken and had painstakingly rebuilt himself into something both familiar and new. One evening in late August, Daniel and Grace sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Grace had her Stanford application open on her laptop, making final revisions to her essay. Daniel had a technical paper he was reviewing, but he kept getting distracted by the simple pleasure of this moment. His daughter beside him, both of them working on their futures. Dad, can I read you something? Grace asked. Always. She cleared her throat and began reading from her essay. My father taught me that success isn't measured in stock prices or job titles, but in the quality of the life you build. When my mother died before I was born, he could have chosen bitterness or ambition. Instead, he chose me. He sold the company they'd built together, took a maintenance job, and dedicated himself to being present every single day of my childhood. Some people might call that giving up. I call it love. Her voice strengthened. For 10 years, my father fixed air conditioners in the building that housed the technology he'd invented. He watched other people get credit for his innovations. He lived small and quiet, asking for nothing except the opportunity to be home by 3:30 to pick me up from school. And he did it without resentment, without regret, because he understood something most people miss, that building a human being is harder and more important than building a company. Grace glanced at Daniel, who was blinking rapidly. But the story doesn't end with sacrifice. Last spring, the truth about my father's work became public. The CEO of Vertex Dynamics, a woman brave enough to acknowledge her company's hidden history, offered him a position to rebuild his career. And my father, after teaching me for 15 years that family comes first, taught me something even more valuable, that it's never too late to reclaim yourself. That choosing love doesn't mean abandoning ambition. It means understanding which season of life calls for which priority. She paused, her own voice thickening with emotion. I'm applying to Stanford's engineering program because my parents showed me that technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. Because my mother believed small businesses deserve the same tools as giants. Because my father demonstrated that the most important infrastructure is often invisible. The daily presence, the steady support, the unwavering belief that your child can do anything. I want to build systems that work like my father's parenting, quietly, efficiently, enabling others to flourish. Grace looked up from the screen. That's how I'm ending it. Is it too much? Too personal? Daniel pulled her close, this young woman who was somehow still his little girl. It's perfect. Absolutely perfect. Your mother would be so proud. What about you? Are you proud? Grace, I've been proud of you since the moment I saw you in the NICU, fighting to breathe. I've been proud of you every single day since. But right now, reading your words, seeing how you understand what I was trying to do, his voice broke. I'm overwhelmed. You're extraordinary. They sat together as the sky darkened, father and daughter, bound by loss and love, and the particular intimacy that comes from building a life together from broken pieces. Inside, Daniel's phone buzzed with messages. Yuki with a breakthrough in the quantum modeling, Isabel confirming board approval for next year's innovation budget. Dr. Hayes sending an article about Daniel's Stanford presentation appearing in Nature. But Daniel ignored them all, choosing instead to sit on a porch swing with his daughter, watching stars emerge in the California sky, grateful beyond words for the life they'd built together. In October, Grace's Stanford acceptance letter arrived early admission. She'd been accepted into the engineering program with a full scholarship from the Laura Chen Reed Memorial Fund. Money that Daniel's work had helped raise, supporting his daughter in the name of the mother she'd never known. The circularity of it was almost too perfect, too poetic. Grace wept with joy. Daniel wept with everything, grief and pride and gratitude and the overwhelming sense that somehow, impossibly, they'd made it. That evening, Daniel drove alone to Palo Alto, to the stretch of El Camino Real where Laura had died 10 years ago. He'd avoided this place for a decade, unable to face the physical location of his greatest loss. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like closure. He stood on the sidewalk near the intersection, watching traffic flow by. Oblivious cars driven by oblivious people, all of them unaware that this spot had destroyed and defined his entire life. The world didn't care about individual tragedy. It just kept moving, indifferent and infinite. We did it, Daniel said quietly to the woman who wasn't there. Grace is going to Stanford. She's brilliant and kind and so much like you it hurts. She wants to change the world, Laura, just like we did. The evening breeze carried away his words. I know you wanted me to keep building, to take care of her, but also to finish what we started. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry I disappeared, but I'm back now, and Grace is okay. More than okay. She's extraordinary. Daniel wiped his eyes, not bothering to hide the tears. I miss you every day. Every single day I wish you were here to see what she's become, to see what we've built. Not just the technology, but her. Our daughter. Our legacy. He paused. I hope you're proud. I hope wherever you are, you know I kept my promise. I made sure she knew she was loved. I made sure she grew up secure and confident and believing she could do anything. A car honked, breaking the moment. Daniel smiled through his tears. Laura would have laughed at him being so dramatic. She'd always had a gift for finding humor in darkness. I'll take care of her at Stanford. Make sure she doesn't work too hard, doesn't sacrifice everything for success the way we did. I'll teach her balance, something we never quite figured out, but I learned the hard way. Daniel touched the chain-link fence beside the sidewalk, grounding himself. Thank you for giving her to me, for those 9 months of carrying her, of protecting her even in death. Thank you for every moment we had together, even though it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. He stood there for another 10 minutes, saying goodbye to the place that had changed everything. Then he got in his car and drove home to Grace, who was making dinner because it was her turn. who was playing music too loud, who was alive and brilliant, and his. The Reed Innovation Center officially opened in November with a ceremony attended by 800 Vertex employees, dozens of journalists, and academic luminaries from across Silicon Valley. The space had been transformed into a showcase of cutting-edge research, quantum computing models, distributed architecture displays, and a museum-quality exhibit documenting the history of Skylink systems. At the center of the exhibit was a large photograph of Daniel and Laura in their Sunnyvale garage, young and exhausted and radiantly happy, surrounded by whiteboards covered in equations. Beside it was Laura's original business plan, her handwriting clear and confident, outlining a vision for democratizing enterprise technology. And there, in a glass case, was Daniel's battered toolbox with the Skylink logo visible beneath years of wear. Daniel stood before these artifacts with Isabel and Dr. Hayes, the three of them silent in the face of history made visible. Grace joined them, slipping her hand into her father's. "This is beautiful, Dad. Mom would love it." "She'd probably point out 3 things we got wrong in the historical timeline," Daniel said, smiling through tears. "She was meticulous about accuracy." "Then let's fix them. Make it perfect." Grace squeezed his hand. "She deserves perfect." The ceremony began with Isabel speaking about Vertex's commitment to innovation, about learning from the past while building the future, about the importance of acknowledging invisible labor and hidden histories. Then Dr. Hayes discussed Daniel's technical contributions, placing them in context of the broader field, explaining how his decade-old work remained foundational to current cloud computing architecture. Finally, Daniel spoke. He'd prepared brief remarks, planning to keep it professional and restrained. But standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, some he knew, most he didn't, he felt the full weight of the journey that had brought him here. 10 years ago, I sold my share of Skylink systems for $200,000, he began. It was the right decision and the worst decision I ever made. Right because it let me bring my daughter home from the NICU, let me be the father she needed. Worse because it required me to become invisible, to watch my work attributed to others, to pretend I'd never dreamed of changing the world. He paused, gathering himself. But here's what I've learned. Invisibility isn't the same as irrelevance. All those years I spent fixing air conditioners, making pancakes, helping with homework, I was building something that mattered. I was building my daughter. And she, in turn, is going to build things that change the world. That's not failure. That's success with a longer timeline than most people recognize. Daniel looked directly at Grace. "This lab is named the Reed Innovation Center because my wife and I believed innovation should serve everyone, not just the powerful. Because Laura saw the world as it could be, not as it was. Because she died believing we could build infrastructure that made the impossible accessible. And because Grace, our daughter, is going to carry that vision forward into places Laura and I never imagined." His voice strengthened. "So this lab isn't about me reclaiming credit or correcting history. It's about ensuring that future generations understand that building takes many forms. Sometimes it's code and algorithms. Sometimes it's companies and products. And sometimes it's the patient, daily work of raising a child who believes she can change everything. All of it matters. All of it is innovation." The applause was thunderous. Daniel stepped away from the podium, and Grace met him with a hug that felt like forgiveness for every sacrifice, validation for every choice, gratitude for every morning he'd been there when she woke up. Later, after the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed, Daniel found himself alone in the lab. The sun was setting through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the whiteboard-covered walls in shades of gold. He picked up a red marker, his favorite, and approached a clean section of board. He wrote Laura's name first, large and clear. Then beneath it, he sketched the original Skylink architecture, the elegant system they'd designed together in that Sunnyvale garage. His hand moved with muscle memory, creating the patterns that had lived in his head for 15 years. "Look at what we built," he whispered to the woman who wasn't there. "Look at Grace. Look at this lab. Look at the fund that's going to help other people avoid the choice I had to make. We did it, Laura. It took longer than we planned, and the path was so much darker than we imagined. But we did it." Behind him, Isabel's voice spoke softly. "She'd be proud of you." Daniel didn't turn around. "I like to think so, though she'd probably tell me the architecture could be more efficient." "Daniel, I need to tell you something." Isabel moved to stand beside him, looking at the whiteboard. When I first confronted you about that Toolbox logo, I was angry, defensive. I thought you were threatening everything I'd built, but you showed me something I'd been too blind to see, that real strength isn't protecting your territory. It's acknowledging the ground you're standing on, the foundation you didn't lay but benefit from. She paused. My father built an empire, but he built it on your dream, and rather than acknowledging that, he erased you, made himself the hero. I perpetuated that erasure for 3 years because I didn't know to question it, but now I do. And I'm committed to making sure Vertex is remembered not for my father's brilliance, but for yours and Laura's vision. For the belief that technology should serve everyone. Your father wasn't a villain, Daniel said quietly. He was complicated, brilliant and ruthless, visionary and opportunistic. He saw my desperation and used it, but he also scaled our technology in ways Laura and I never could have. He's part of this story too. Thank you for that, Grace. Isabel smiled sadly. I'm still figuring out how to honor his contributions while acknowledging his failures. It's harder than I expected, loving someone and disagreeing with their choices. That's parenthood too, Daniel said, thinking of Grace, of all the ways she'd need to reconcile his choices when she was older. We're all complicated. We all do our best with impossible circumstances. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset fade. Finally, Isabel spoke again. What's next for you? The quantum integration project is exceeding expectations. You've rebuilt your reputation. Grace is going to Stanford. You've accomplished what you set out to do. What's next? Daniel set down the marker, considering. I keep building. Not because I need to prove anything anymore, but because I finally understand what Laura knew all along. That building is who I am. Not instead of being a father, but integrated with it. I'll keep working in this lab, keep mentoring young researchers, keep trying to solve problems that matter. And I'll watch Grace become whoever she's meant to be, supporting her but not suffocating her. He turned to face Isabel fully. And I'll remember. Every day I'll remember the woman who saw possibilities where others saw limitations, who believed a garage startup could democratize enterprise technology, who died protecting our daughter, who made me promise to choose Grace over everything else, and who would be proud that I finally figured out how to choose both. Isabel nodded, her eyes bright. She chose well. You were worthy of her vision. I hope so. I'm still trying to be. They left the lab together, turning off lights as they went. But before stepping into the elevator, Daniel looked back one final time. The photograph of Laura glowed softly in the dimmed space, her young face frozen in a moment of perfect joy. Beside her in the photo, Daniel's 28-year-old self looked impossibly naive, blissfully unaware of the tragedy waiting just months ahead. But they'd been happy in that garage. They'd believed in themselves and each other. They'd built something beautiful, even if they didn't get to keep it. And from that foundation, despite everything, Grace had grown. The lab had been born. The fund had launched. The dream had survived. Daniel raised his hand in a small wave to the photograph, to the past, to the woman who'd given him everything and who he'd never stopped missing. Then he stepped into the elevator and descended to ground level, where Grace was waiting by the car, scrolling her phone and humming the song her mother used to love. Ready to go home, Dad? Yes, sweetheart. Let's go home. They drove through San Jose as the city lit up against the darkening sky. Millions of lights, millions of lives, millions of stories intersecting in ways too complex to fully comprehend. Grace talked about her plans for Stanford, her excitement about quantum computing research, her hope that she could build things as meaningful as her parents had built. Daniel listened, occasionally interjecting, mostly just absorbing the sound of his daughter's voice planning her future with confidence. This was what he'd worked for, this moment. This young woman who knew she was loved absolutely and believed she could accomplish anything. When they got home, Daniel made dinner while Grace worked on her laptop at the kitchen table. They ate together, talking about everything and nothing, the comfortable conversation of two people who'd spent 15 years building a life together from grief and determination and love. Later, after Grace went to bed, Daniel sat on the back porch with a cup of tea looking up at the stars. They were faint but visible if you knew where to look. Laura used to say that's what mattered, knowing where to look, recognizing the light even when it was distant and small. His phone buzzed. A message from Yuki. Breakthrough on the quantum routing algorithm. Come see tomorrow. This changes everything. Daniel smiled, feeling the familiar thrill of discovery, of problems yielding to persistent thought. Tomorrow he'd go to the lab early, examine Yuki's work, help shape it into something elegant and powerful. He'd mentor young researchers who reminded him of his younger self. He'd work on problems that mattered. But tonight, he was just a father who'd kept his promise, who'd chosen love over ambition and had somehow, impossibly, found his way back to both, who'd lost everything and rebuilt differently but no less beautifully. Daniel raised his teacup to the stars, to the woman who wasn't there but who'd never really left. We made it, Laura. Grace is okay. The work continues. The dream survived. His voice was soft, meant only for the night. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for Grace. Thank you for every moment we had, even though it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough, but it was everything. The stars offered no response, just their distant light traveling across impossible distances to reach him. But somehow, in the silence and the darkness and the small comfort of his back porch, Daniel felt at peace. He'd spent 10 years choosing small, choosing quiet, choosing his daughter over everything else. And now, because of those choices, Grace was thriving. The technology he'd pioneered was helping others. Laura's name lived on in scholarships and innovation funds. The foundation he and Laura had laid was visible at last. Success, Daniel had learned, wasn't measured in stock prices or job titles or even in world-changing innovations. It was measured in moments like this: a daughter sleeping safely in her room, dreams waiting to be pursued, love given freely without expectation of return. He'd thought building an empire mattered most, but he'd been wrong. Building a life mattered more. Building a daughter who believed she could change the world mattered more. Building slowly, patiently, invisibly mattered more. And now, finally, Daniel Reed was building again. Not instead of being a father, but alongside it. Not abandoning the quiet life he'd created, but expanding it to include the brilliant life he'd once imagined. Both things were true. Both things mattered. And somehow, after 10 years of darkness and sacrifice and patient daily love, both things were possible. Daniel finished his tea, stood, and went inside. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new possibilities, new moments of building. But tonight, he was simply grateful. For Grace. For second chances. For the woman who'd loved him completely and who taught him that the best foundations are laid with love, even when they're invisible to everyone except the people who matter most. The house was quiet. Grace was dreaming of Stanford, of quantum computing, of the future she'd build. Daniel checked on her one last time before going to bed, an old habit from when she was tiny, reassuring himself that she was breathing, safe, his. She stirred slightly when he opened her door, mumbling in her sleep. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, sweetheart. Always." Daniel closed her door softly and stood in the hallway of their modest rental house, the house that had sheltered them through the hardest decade, the house that had been enough even when it was all they had. And for the first time in 10 years, Daniel Reed, PhD from Stanford, co-founder of Skylink Systems, Chief Innovation Officer of Vertex Dynamics, father of the extraordinary Grace, felt like his life was finally complete. Not perfect, never perfect, but complete. He'd built something beautiful with Laura, lost it, built something different with Grace, and now, impossibly, was building again. All three versions of himself integrated into one person: the brilliant technologist, the devoted father, the man who'd learned that love and ambition weren't opposites but partners in the long work of building a meaningful life. The Toolbox with its worn logo sat in Daniel's home office, a reminder of where he'd been. The whiteboard in the Reed Innovation Center held his current work, a promise of where he was going. And Grace, sleeping peacefully down the hall, was the bridge between past and future, the living proof that choosing love was never a mistake. Daniel went to bed that night with gratitude overwhelming grief, hope outlasting loss, and the quiet certainty that he'd kept his promise to Laura. Grace was thriving. The work continued, and somewhere, impossibly distant and eternally close, Laura Chen Reed was smiling. The man who'd built empires and lost them, who'd chosen his daughter over his dreams and found a way to reclaim both, who'd learned that the best innovations are often invisible. He'd finally come home to himself. And that, Daniel thought as sleep found him, was enough. More than enough. Everything.